Welcome to this gentle journey of understanding, where we explore the quiet depths of human psychology and the subtle ways our minds can be influenced in the workplace. Take a moment to settle into a comfortable position, perhaps adjusting your pillow or pulling a soft blanket closer around you. Let your breathing slow naturally as we begin this peaceful exploration together. Tonight we will walk through the landscape of your mind, discovering why certain situations at work might leave you feeling confused, pressured, or uncertain about decisions you have made. This is not a journey of judgment or criticism, but rather one of gentle awareness and understanding. Like watching clouds drift slowly across an evening sky, we will observe the patterns of human behavior with curiosity and compassion. The workplace can sometimes feel like a complex ecosystem where invisible currents of influence flow between people. Perhaps you have experienced moments when you agreed to something you later regretted, or found yourself saying yes when you meant to say no. Maybe you have noticed how certain colleagues seem to have an unusual ability to get others to do what they want. While you struggle to understand how this happens, these experiences are more common than you might think, and they stem from fundamental aspects of how our brains are designed to process information and make decisions. Our minds evolved over thousands of years, carry within them ancient patterns of response that once helped our ancestors survive in small tribal communities. These same patterns continue to influence us today, even in the fluorescent-lit corridors of modern office buildings. Understanding these patterns is like learning to read the weather, helping you navigate your professional relationships with greater awareness and intention. As we move through this exploration together, imagine that you are sitting by a calm lake at twilight, watching the gentle ripples spread across the water's surface. Each concept we discuss is like one of those ripples, expanding outward to touch different aspects of your experience. There is no need to memorize or analyze everything we cover. Simply allow the ideas to wash over you like warm waves, trusting that your unconscious mind will absorb what serves you best. The goal of our time together is not to make you suspicious or fearful of your colleagues, but rather to help you develop a deeper understanding of human nature, including your own. When you understand why certain tactics work on most people, you become less susceptible to them yourself. When you recognize the emotional and psychological mechanisms at play in workplace interactions, you can respond from a place of choice rather than automatic reaction. Think of this knowledge as a gentle shield, not one made of hard metal that creates barriers between you and others, but rather like a soft, protective light that surrounds you with awareness. This light allows you to maintain your natural warmth and openness while also protecting your ability to make decisions that truly serve your best interests. Throughout history, humans have always influenced one another. This is neither inherently good nor bad. It simply is part of our social nature. Parents influence children, teachers influence students, friends influence friends. The difference lies in intention and awareness. When influence is used with genuine care for another person's well-being, it can be a beautiful gift. When it is used primarily for personal gain without regard for others, it becomes manipulation in the workplace. These dynamics become particularly complex because they involve not just personal relationships, but also professional hierarchies, financial pressures, and career aspirations. The stakes can feel higher and the emotional landscape more charged. Understanding these dynamics helps you navigate them with greater skill and peace of mind. As we begin our first chapter, imagine that you are walking down a quiet path through an ancient forest. The trees around you have witnessed countless generations of human interaction, and their gentle presence reminds us that the patterns we will explore tonight are as old as humanity itself. Let your footsteps be soft and unhurried as we discover together how the seeds of influence were first planted in human society. The story of manipulation begins not in modern boardrooms or corporate offices, but in the earliest days of human civilization, when our ancestors first learned to live together in groups larger than immediate family units. Picture, if you will, a time when the world was younger and wilder, when humans gathered around flickering fires under star-filled skies, sharing stories and making decisions that would affect the survival of their entire community. In these ancient times, the ability to influence others was often a matter of life and death. The person who could convince the group to move to better hunting grounds might save everyone from starvation. The individual who could persuade others to work together on building shelter might protect the community from harsh weather. Leadership and influence were not abstract concepts but practical tools for survival. However, even in these early communities, some individuals discovered that the same skills used for the group's benefit could also be used for personal advantage. A persuasive hunter might convince others to give him a larger share of the meat. A charismatic storyteller might use her influence to gain special privileges or avoid unpleasant tasks. The seeds of workplace manipulation were planted in these ancient social dynamics, growing slowly over thousands of years into the complex forms we see today. As human societies became more sophisticated, so did the methods of influence. In ancient Egypt, scribes learned not just to record information but to present it in ways that would please their pharaohs and advance their own positions. In ancient Greece, the art of rhetoric was developed and refined, teaching people how to structure arguments and appeal to emotions in order to persuade others. The Romans perfected systems of patronage and political influence that would echo through centuries of human organization. These historical developments were not inherently manipulative, but they created the foundation upon which more subtle and sometimes deceptive forms of influence could be built. As societies grew larger and more complex, direct personal relationships became less common, and people had to learn to navigate interactions with strangers and acquaintances whose motivations they could not easily read. The medieval period brought new forms of social organization, with complex hierarchies and systems of obligation that required individuals to understand and work within intricate webs of influence. A peasant needed to know how to approach a lord. A merchant had to understand how to negotiate with guild leaders, and everyone had to navigate the growing influence of religious institutions. The workplace, as we understand it today, was beginning to take shape during the Renaissance. As trade expanded and new forms of commerce emerged, the skills of persuasion and influence became even more important. Merchants traveling between cities had to quickly establish trust and credibility with strangers. Artisans competing for commissions had to learn to present themselves and their work in the most favorable light. The foundations of modern sales and marketing techniques were being laid, along with the psychological insights that would later be used in workplace manipulation. The Industrial Revolution marked a turning point in human work relationships. For the first time in history, large numbers of people worked together in factories and other industrial settings, often under the supervision of managers they barely knew. The personal relationships that had characterized most work throughout human history gave way to more impersonal, hierarchical structures. Workers had to learn to navigate relationships with supervisors who might have very different backgrounds, values, and motivations. This shift created new opportunities for manipulation because the traditional social bonds that had provided some protection against exploitation were weakened. A factory worker might not know whether a supervisor's request was reasonable or exploitative because they lacked the personal relationship and community context that would have provided guidance in earlier eras. The anonymity and scale of industrial work made it easier for those in positions of authority to take advantage of those beneath them in the hierarchy. As the 20th century progressed, researchers began to study these workplace dynamics more systematically. Psychologists and sociologists conducted experiments and observations that revealed the specific mechanisms by which people influence one another. They discovered that certain techniques work reliably across different cultures and contexts, and they began to understand why some individuals are more susceptible to influence than others. The famous Hawthorne studies of the 1920s and 1930s revealed that workers' productivity could be influenced not just by physical working conditions, but by psychological factors such as attention from management and the feeling of being part of a special group. These studies marked the beginning of a more sophisticated understanding of workplace psychology, but they also provided tools that could be used to manipulate workers more effectively. World War II accelerated research into persuasion and influence, as governments on all sides sought to understand how to motivate their own populations and demoralize their enemies. Propaganda techniques were refined and tested on massive scales, providing insights into human psychology that would later be applied in commercial and workplace settings. The boundary between legitimate influence and manipulation became increasingly blurred. In the post-war era, as corporations grew larger and more complex, the techniques of influence became more sophisticated and subtle. Management consultants and organizational psychologists developed new methods for motivating employees, building team loyalty and encouraging productivity. Many of these techniques were genuinely beneficial, creating more positive and effective work environments. However, the same knowledge could also be used to exploit workers' psychological vulnerabilities for the benefit of management or individual supervisors. The rise of consumer psychology in the 1950s and 1960s brought new insights into how people make decisions and what factors influence their choices. Advertisers learned to appeal to unconscious desires and fears, using techniques that bypassed rational analysis. These same methods began to appear in workplace settings, as managers and colleagues learned to frame requests and proposals in ways that would be difficult to refuse. The information age has brought both new opportunities and new challenges in the realm of workplace influence. Email, instant messaging, and other digital communication tools have created new channels for influence and manipulation. The speed and volume of modern communication can overwhelm people's ability to carefully consider each request or proposal they receive. The constant connectivity of modern work life means that the boundaries between professional and personal time have become blurred, creating new opportunities for inappropriate influence. At the same time, the democratization of information has made it easier for people to learn about manipulation techniques and protect themselves. Books, articles, and online resources provide insights that were once available only to researchers and specialists. The challenge now is not lack of information, but rather learning to apply this knowledge in the complex, fast-paced environment of modern work. Understanding this historical progression helps us see that workplace manipulation is not a new phenomenon, but rather the latest evolution of influence techniques that are as old as human society itself. The specific methods may change with technology and social organization, but the underlying psychological principles remain remarkably consistent. By understanding these principles and their historical development, we can better recognize when they are being used on us and develop more effective strategies for maintaining our autonomy and making decisions that truly serve our best interests. As we conclude this gentle introduction to the historical roots of workplace influence, take a moment to reflect on your own experiences. Perhaps you can now see some of your workplace interactions in a new light, understanding them as part of a much larger human story that stretches back to our earliest ancestors. This perspective can be both humbling and empowering, reminding us that we are part of an ongoing human drama while also giving us tools to write our own roles more consciously. As we continue our peaceful journey through the landscape of human psychology, imagine yourself settling deeper into a comfortable chair beside a gently crackling fireplace. The flames dance slowly, casting warm shadows on the walls as we explore one of the most fundamental aspects of human nature, our remarkable capacity for trust. This capacity, which has allowed our species to build civilizations and create bonds that span continents, is also the very quality that makes us vulnerable to manipulation in our professional lives. Trust is perhaps the most beautiful and essential element of human relationships. It is the invisible thread that weaves through every interaction, every conversation, every moment of cooperation between people. When you wake up in the morning and turn on the light switch, you trust that the electrical system will work. When you drive to work, you trust that other drivers will follow the rules of the road. When you enter your workplace, you trust that your colleagues will treat you with basic respect and honesty. This trust is so fundamental to our daily existence that we rarely stop to consider how extraordinary it really is. Our brains are literally wired to trust. From the moment we are born, we depend on others for our survival. and this dependence creates neural pathways that predispose us to believe what others tell us and to assume that their intentions are generally benevolent. This is not a weakness or a flaw in our design, but rather an essential feature that has allowed humans to cooperate on a scale unmatched by any other species on Earth. Think about a newborn baby completely helpless and dependent on the care of adults. That baby's survival depends entirely on its ability to trust that the adults around it will provide food, warmth, and protection. There is no time for the baby to carefully evaluate the trustworthiness of each caregiver or to develop sophisticated strategies for detecting deception. The baby must trust immediately and completely, or it will not survive. This fundamental need for trust becomes embedded in our neural architecture and continues to influence our behavior throughout our lives. As we grow and develop, our capacity for trust becomes more sophisticated, but it never disappears. We learn to be more selective about whom we trust and in what circumstances. But the underlying tendency to believe others and to assume good intentions remains strong. This is generally a positive trait that allows us to form relationships, build communities, and accomplish things that would be impossible if we approached every interaction with suspicion and skepticism. However, this same tendency that serves us so well in most situations can become a vulnerability in environments where some individuals are willing to exploit others' trust for personal gain. The workplace, with its complex hierarchies, competing interests, and professional pressures, can sometimes become such an environment. Understanding how our trust mechanisms work can help us maintain our natural openness while also protecting ourselves from those who might take advantage of our good nature. The neurological basis of trust involves several key brain systems that work together to help us navigate social relationships. The hormone oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone, plays a crucial role in creating feelings of trust and connection. When we interact with someone we perceive as trustworthy, our brains release oxytocin, which creates a warm, positive feeling and makes us more likely to cooperate with that person. This system evolved to help us form strong bonds with family members and close allies, but it can be triggered by anyone who knows how to present themselves in the right way. Skilled manipulators often understand the system intuitively. Even if they don't know the scientific details, they know that creating a sense of warmth, similarity, and shared interest can trigger trust responses in others. They might mirror your body language, express interest in your hobbies, or share personal stories that create a sense of intimacy and connection. These behaviors can trigger oxytocin release and make you feel more trusting toward them, even if you have no rational reason to trust them. Another important aspect of how our brains process trust involves what psychologists call the halo effect. This is the tendency to assume that if someone is good in one area, they are probably good in other areas as well. If a colleague is well-dressed and articulate, we might unconsciously assume that they are also honest and competent. If someone has an impressive job title or educational background, we might trust their judgment in areas completely unrelated to their expertise. This mental shortcut usually serves us well, but it can also be exploited by those who understand how to create positive first impressions and maintain an appealing facade. The social proof mechanism is another way our brains determine whom to trust. We look to see how others are responding to a person or situation, and we use that information to guide our own responses. If we see that our colleagues seem to trust and respect someone, we are more likely to trust them as well. This makes evolutionary sense because in small tribal groups, the collective judgment of the community was usually more reliable than any individual's assessment. However, in modern workplace settings, this mechanism can be manipulated by creating false impressions of consensus or by gradually building a reputation through carefully managed interactions. Our brains also have a strong bias toward believing information that confirms what we already think we know. This is called confirmation bias, and it affects how we process information about people's trustworthiness. If someone's initial behavior fits our expectations of how a trustworthy person should act, we tend to interpret their subsequent behavior in ways that confirm our initial assessment. We notice and remember information that supports our belief that they are trustworthy, while overlooking or forgetting information that might suggest otherwise. This bias can be particularly problematic in workplace relationships that develop over time. A colleague might establish themselves as trustworthy through a series of small, genuine acts of helpfulness and reliability. Once we have categorized them as trustworthy, we might continue to trust them even when their behavior begins to change in subtle ways. We might rationalize or excuse behaviors that we would find suspicious in someone we trusted less, simply because they don't fit our established mental model of who this person is. The authority bias is another crucial factor in workplace trust dynamics. We are naturally inclined to trust people in positions of authority, partly because this tendency was adaptive in our evolutionary past, and partly because we are socialized from childhood to respect and obey authority figures. When someone has a higher position in the organizational hierarchy, our brains automatically assign them greater credibility and trustworthiness, even in matters that have nothing to do with their official responsibilities. This authority bias can be exploited in various ways. Someone might use their official position to lend credibility to personal requests or opinions that have nothing to do with their job responsibilities. They might present their personal preferences as company policy or use their authority to pressure others into agreements that primarily benefit themselves. Because our brains are wired to trust authority figures, we might not question these behaviors as critically as we should. The reciprocity principle is another fundamental aspect of human psychology that affects trust and can be manipulated in workplace settings. When someone does something nice for us, we feel a psychological pressure to return the favor. This is a deeply ingrained social mechanism that helps maintain cooperative relationships and ensures that acts of kindness and generosity are rewarded rather than taken advantage of. However, the same mechanism can be exploited by people who do small favors or kindnesses with the specific intention of creating a sense of obligation that they can later cash in for much larger benefits. A manipulative colleague might bring you coffee, help you with a small task, or offer a compliment at just the right moment, not out of genuine kindness but as an investment in future influence. When they later ask you to cover for them, take on extra work, or support them in a meeting, your brain's reciprocity mechanism makes it difficult to refuse. You feel that you owe them something, even though the original favor was unsolicited and the return favor they're requesting is much more significant. The consistency principle is another psychological mechanism that affects trust and can be exploited. We have a strong desire to be consistent with our previous statements, decisions, and actions once we have publicly committed to something or identified ourselves in a certain way. We feel psychological pressure to continue acting in ways that are consistent with that commitment or identity. This helps us maintain stable relationships and reliable reputations. But it can also be used to manipulate our future behavior. A skilled manipulator might get you to make a small commitment or agree to a minor request, knowing that this creates psychological pressure for you to agree to larger, related requests in the future. They might get you to express support for a general principle or value, then later frame their requests in terms of that principle, making it difficult for you to refuse without feeling that you are being inconsistent or hypocritical. The liking bias is perhaps one of the most obvious but also most powerful factors in trust and influence. We are much more likely to trust and be influenced by people we like than by people we dislike or feel neutral about. This seems obvious, but the implications are more complex than they might first appear. Our feelings of liking can be influenced by many factors that have nothing to do with someone's actual trustworthiness or the merit of their requests. People who understand this principle can manipulate our feelings of liking through various techniques. They might find genuine common interests or experiences to bond over, or they might manufacture false similarities and connections. They might use humor, compliments, or expressions of admiration to create positive feelings. They might position themselves as being on your side in conflicts with others, creating a sense of alliance and shared identity. The scarcity principle affects trust by making us feel that we need to act quickly before an opportunity disappears. When someone presents a request or opportunity as being limited in time or availability, our brains often interpret this as a signal that the opportunity is valuable and that the person offering it is doing us a favor by including us. This can override our normal caution and critical thinking, leading us to trust and agree to things we might otherwise question more carefully. In workplace settings, artificial scarcity might be created around opportunities for advancement, special projects, or access to information or resources. A manipulative colleague or supervisor might present these opportunities in ways that create time pressure and competition, making it difficult for you to carefully evaluate whether the opportunity is genuinely beneficial or whether the terms being offered are fair. Understanding these psychological mechanisms is not meant to make you suspicious or paranoid about every workplace interaction. The vast majority of your colleagues are probably decent people who are not trying to manipulate you. However, understanding how trust works can help you maintain appropriate boundaries and make more conscious decisions about when and how much to trust others. The goal is not to eliminate trust from your professional relationships, but rather to develop what we might call conscious trust or informed trust. This means being aware of the factors that influence your trust responses and taking time to evaluate whether your trust is based on solid evidence or simply on psychological triggers that could be misleading. One way to develop this conscious trust is to pay attention to the difference between your immediate emotional response to someone and your rational assessment of their behavior over time. If you find yourself immediately trusting someone based on their charm, appearance, or position, take a step back and ask yourself what evidence you actually have for their trustworthiness. Look at their actions rather than their words, and pay attention to how they treat others, especially those who have less power or influence. Another helpful practice is to notice when you feel pressured to make quick decisions about trust or commitment. Genuine opportunities and trustworthy people usually allow you time to think things over and ask questions. If someone is pushing you to trust them or agree to something immediately, that itself might be a red flag worth paying attention to. It's also important to remember that trust is not an all-or-nothing proposition. You can trust someone in some areas while maintaining healthy skepticism in others. You might trust a colleague to do good work on shared projects while not trusting their advice about office politics. You might trust your supervisor's expertise in their field while being cautious about their personal recommendations or requests that go beyond normal job responsibilities. As we conclude this gentle exploration of trust and its role in workplace manipulation, take a moment to appreciate the remarkable gift that trust represents. It is one of humanity's greatest strengths, allowing us to cooperate, create, and care for one another in ways that would be impossible in a world of constant suspicion and fear. The goal is not to diminish this gift, but rather to protect it by using it wisely and consciously, like a gardener who tends their plants with both love and knowledge. Understanding how to protect your trust while still allowing it to flourish, you can maintain the openness and warmth that make you a good colleague and friend, while also protecting yourself from those who might take advantage of your generous nature. In this balance, you honor both your own well-being and the authentic connections that make work and life meaningful. Imagine yourself walking along a quiet forest path where the morning mist still clings to the trees, creating a soft, dreamlike atmosphere as we continue our gentle journey through the landscape of human psychology. We arrive at one of the most fascinating and important aspects of how our minds work, the intricate network of mental shortcuts and pathways that help us navigate the countless decisions we face each day. These cognitive shortcuts, which psychologists call heuristics, are like well-worn trails through the forest of our consciousness, allowing us to move quickly and efficiently through familiar territory. Our brains are remarkable organs, processing vast amounts of information every second and making thousands of decisions throughout each day. From the moment you wake up and decide what to wear, to choosing which route to take to work, to determining how to respond to an email from a colleague. Your mind is constantly evaluating options and making choices. If we had to carefully analyze every single decision with the same thoroughness we might use for major life choices, we would be paralyzed by the sheer volume of mental processing required. To solve this problem, our brains have evolved sophisticated systems of mental shortcuts that allow us to make quick, generally reliable decisions based on limited information. These shortcuts work by recognizing patterns from our past experiences and applying rules of thumb that have served us well in similar situations. Most of the time, these mental pathways serve us beautifully, allowing us to function efficiently in a complex world. However, these same shortcuts can also be exploited by those who understand how they work, leading us to make decisions that may not be in our best interests. Think of your mind as a vast library with millions of books, each representing a memory experience or piece of knowledge when you need to make a decision. You don't have time to read through every relevant book in the library. Instead, you rely on a sophisticated filing system that helps you quickly locate the most relevant information and apply it to your current situation. This filing system works through pattern recognition, emotional associations, and learned rules that help you categorize new experiences based on their similarity to past ones. The availability heuristic is one of the most common mental shortcuts we use, and it involves judging the likelihood or importance of something based on how easily we can recall examples of it. If you can quickly think of several instances when something happened, your brain assumes it must be common or important. If you struggle to recall examples, your brain assumes it must be rare or unimportant. This shortcut usually works well because things that happen frequently or recently are indeed more likely to be relevant to your current situation. However, this mental pathway can be manipulated in workplace settings. A colleague might repeatedly mention examples of people who benefited from following their advice, making it seem like their guidance is more reliable than it actually is. They might share stories about negative consequences that befell people who didn't listen to them, making their warnings seem more urgent and important. By controlling what examples are most readily available in your memory, they can influence how you assess risks and opportunities. The representativeness heuristic involves making judgments based on how closely something matches our mental prototype or stereotype of a particular category. When we meet someone new, we quickly categorize them based on their appearance, manner of speaking, and behavior, then make assumptions about their other characteristics based on our mental model of that type of person. This allows us to quickly form initial impressions and decide how to interact with someone. But it can also lead to significant errors in judgment. In professional settings, this heuristic can be exploited through careful impression management. Someone might dress, speak, and behave in ways that match your mental prototype of a trustworthy, competent professional, leading you to assume they possess other positive qualities that may not actually be present. They might adopt the mannerisms and vocabulary of successful people in your field, triggering your representativeness heuristic and making you more likely to trust their judgment and follow their suggestions. The anchoring effect is another powerful mental shortcut that influences how we make decisions involving numbers, quantities, or comparisons when we're trying to estimate something. We tend to be heavily influenced by the first number we hear, even if that number is completely irrelevant to the decision at hand. This initial number becomes an anchor that pulls our subsequent estimates toward it, even when we're consciously trying to be objective. This effect can be used manipulatively in workplace negotiations and discussions. Someone might mention an extremely high or low number early in a conversation about salaries, budgets, or deadlines, knowing that this number will influence your subsequent thinking about what constitutes a reasonable range. They might frame their requests in terms of much larger requests they could have made, making their actual requests seem modest and reasonable by comparison. The confirmation bias represents one of the most pervasive and influential mental shortcuts in human thinking. Once we form an initial opinion or belief about something, we tend to seek out information that confirms that belief while ignoring or dismissing information that contradicts it. This happens automatically and unconsciously, and it affects how we interpret ambiguous information. what we pay attention to, and what we remember from our experiences. This bias can be exploited by people who understand how to shape your initial impressions and then provide you with information that seems to confirm those impressions. They might present themselves in a way that triggers positive initial assumptions, then follow up with carefully selected examples and stories that seem to validate those assumptions. Meanwhile, they might downplay or reframe any contradictory information in ways that don't challenge your initial positive impression. The halo effect is a specific type of cognitive shortcut where our overall impression of someone influences how we interpret their specific actions and characteristics. If we have a generally positive impression of someone, we tend to interpret their ambiguous behaviors in positive ways. If we have a negative impression, we tend to interpret the same behaviors negatively. This effect is so strong that it can override more specific and relevant information about someone's actual performance or character. Skilled manipulators often work hard to create a strong positive halo around themselves, knowing that once this halo is established, people will interpret their subsequent actions more favorably. They might establish their competence in one highly visible area, knowing that this will create assumptions about their competence in other unrelated areas. They might cultivate a reputation for being helpful or generous in small, noticeable ways, knowing that this will make people less likely to question their motives when they make larger requests. The social proof heuristic involves looking to the behavior of others to guide our own decisions, especially in situations where we're uncertain about the appropriate course of action. This mental shortcut evolved because in many situations, following the crowd is indeed the safest and most effective strategy. If everyone else is running away from something, it's probably wise to run too, even if you don't immediately understand the danger. However, this heuristic can be manipulated through the creation of false consensus or artificial social pressure. Someone might claim that everyone is doing something or that most people agree with a particular position, when in reality this consensus doesn't exist or is much weaker than they suggest. They might arrange for you to hear similar opinions from multiple sources, creating the impression of widespread agreement when these sources are actually coordinated or influenced by the same person. The authority heuristic leads us to give greater weight to information and requests that come from people in positions of authority or expertise. This shortcut usually serves us well because people in authority positions often do have access to better information and more experience relevant to the decisions we're facing. However, this heuristic can be exploited by people who either misrepresent their level of authority or expertise, or who use their legitimate authority in areas where it doesn't actually apply. Someone might invoke their job title or educational credentials to lend weight to opinions that fall outside their area of expertise. They might present personal preferences as official policies or use their position in the organizational hierarchy to pressure others into agreements that primarily serve their personal interests. Because our brains automatically assign greater credibility to authority figures, we might not question these behaviors as critically as we should. The reciprocity heuristic creates a sense of obligation to return favors and kindnesses that others have shown us. This mental shortcut helps maintain cooperative relationships and ensures that generosity is rewarded rather than exploited. However, it can also be manipulated by people who do small favors with the specific intention of creating a sense of obligation that they can later exploit for much larger benefits. The key to this manipulation is often the timing and framing of the initial favor. Someone might help you with a task just before asking for something much more significant in return. They might frame their help as being particularly costly or inconvenient for them, even when it actually wasn't to increase your sense of obligation. They might do multiple small favors over time, building up a sense of debt that they can then call in all at once for a major request. The scarcity heuristic makes us value things more highly when we believe they are rare, limited, or in high demand. This shortcut evolved because truly scarce resources often are more valuable, and opportunities that disappear quickly often are worth pursuing. However, this heuristic can be manipulated through the creation of artificial scarcity or false time pressure. Someone might present an opportunity as being available only to a select few people or for a limited time. when in reality these limitations are arbitrary or manufactured. They might create competition for resources or opportunities that aren't actually scarce. Knowing that the perception of scarcity will make these things seem more valuable and make you more likely to act quickly without careful consideration. The consistency heuristic creates pressure to act in ways that are consistent with our previous statements. Decisions and self-image. This mental shortcut helps us maintain stable identities and reliable reputations, which are important for building trust and maintaining relationships. However, it can also be exploited by people who get us to make small commitments that then create pressure to make larger, related commitments. This manipulation often works through a process called foot in the door, where someone starts with a small, reasonable request that most people would agree to, then follows up with progressively larger requests that are framed as being consistent with the initial agreement. Once you've agreed to the first request, your consistency heuristic makes it psychologically difficult to refuse the subsequent requests without feeling that you're being inconsistent or unreliable. The liking heuristic makes us more susceptible to influence from people we like, trust, or feel connected to. This shortcut usually serves us well because people we genuinely like often do have our best interests at heart and can provide valuable advice and support. However, this heuristic can be manipulated by people who work to artificially create feelings of liking and connection. This manipulation might involve finding or manufacturing similarities between themselves and you, expressing admiration for your work or opinions, or positioning themselves as being on your side in conflicts with others. They might use humor, compliments, or shared experiences to create positive feelings, knowing that these feelings will make you more likely to trust their judgment and agree to their requests. Understanding these mental shortcuts is not meant to make you suspicious of every interaction or to suggest that you should try to eliminate these heuristics from your thinking. These cognitive pathways exist because they generally serve us well, allowing us to function efficiently in a complex social world. The goal is rather to develop awareness of when these shortcuts might be leading you astray, and to know when it's worth taking the time for more careful, deliberate analysis. One way to protect yourself from manipulation is to notice when you're being pressured to make quick decisions. Most legitimate opportunities and trustworthy people will allow you time to think things over, ask questions, and seek additional information. If someone is pushing you to decide immediately, that itself might be a signal that they're trying to prevent you from engaging your more careful, analytical thinking processes. Another protective strategy is to pay attention to your emotional state when making decisions. Strong emotions, whether positive or negative, can interfere with careful thinking and make you more susceptible to manipulation. If you notice that you're feeling particularly excited, anxious, grateful, or pressured, it might be worth taking some time to let those emotions settle before making important commitments. It's also helpful to develop the habit of seeking out information that contradicts your initial impressions and assumptions. This can help counteract confirmation bias and give you a more balanced view of situations and people. Ask yourself what evidence might suggest that your initial assessment is wrong, and actively look for that evidence before making important decisions. Finally, remember that it's okay to change your mind when you receive new information or when you realize that a decision was based more on mental shortcuts than on careful analysis. The consistency heuristic can make us feel that changing our minds is a sign of weakness or unreliability, but in reality, the ability to update your thinking based on new information is a sign of wisdom and intellectual honesty. As we conclude this gentle exploration of mental pathways and cognitive shortcuts, imagine yourself back on that misty forest path, now with a deeper understanding of the terrain through which your mind travels each day. These pathways are not obstacles to be avoided, but rather tools to be used wisely and consciously. Like a skilled hiker who knows when to follow the well-worn trail and when to step carefully off the path for a closer look at something interesting, you can learn to use your mental shortcuts when they serve you well, while also knowing when to slow down and engage in more deliberate thinking. The beauty of understanding these cognitive processes lies not in eliminating them, but in developing the awareness to use them consciously rather than being used by them. In this awareness, you find both efficiency and wisdom, allowing you to navigate your professional relationships with both speed and discernment. Picture yourself sitting in a peaceful garden at dusk, where the gentle evening breeze carries the soft fragrance of blooming flowers and the distant sound of wind chimes creates a soothing melody. As twilight settles around us, we turn our attention to one of the most powerful and complex aspects of human experience: our emotions. These invisible forces flow through our daily lives like underground rivers, shaping our decisions, coloring our perceptions, and influencing our interactions with others in ways we often don't fully recognize or understand. Emotions are not merely feelings that happen to us. They are sophisticated information processing systems that evolved over millions of years to help us navigate the challenges of survival and social cooperation. When you feel fear, your body is preparing you to respond to potential danger. When you experience joy, your brain is reinforcing behaviors and relationships that have proven beneficial. When you feel anger, your system is mobilizing resources to address perceived threats or injustices. These emotional responses happen automatically and instantaneously, often before our conscious minds have had time to fully process what is occurring around us. In the workplace, this emotional processing system continues to operate just as it did in our ancestral environments. But the triggers and contexts have changed dramatically. Instead of responding to physical threats like predators or natural disasters, we now navigate complex social hierarchies, competing demands for our time and attention, and subtle forms of pressure and influence that our emotional systems may not be well equipped to handle. Understanding how emotions work in professional settings can help us recognize when our feelings are being deliberately triggered or manipulated by others. The human brain processes emotional information through several interconnected systems, with the amygdala playing a particularly crucial role in detecting potential threats and triggering rapid emotional responses. This small almond-shaped structure in the limbic system acts like an early warning system, constantly scanning our environment for signs of danger, opportunity, or social significance. When the amygdala detects something important, it can trigger an emotional response before the information even reaches the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for rational analysis and conscious decision-making. This means that in many workplace situations, you may find yourself feeling anxious, excited, angry, or grateful before you've had a chance to consciously evaluate whether these feelings are appropriate or helpful. A colleague's tone of voice, facial expression, or choice of words can trigger emotional responses that influence your subsequent thinking and behavior, even when the rational part of your mind knows that the situation doesn't warrant such a strong reaction. Fear is perhaps the most primitive and powerful emotion, and it can be easily triggered in workplace settings through various forms of subtle threat or pressure. These threats are rarely physical in modern professional environments, but they can be just as effective in triggering our ancient fear responses. The threat might be to your job security, your reputation, your relationships with colleagues, or your future opportunities for advancement. When someone suggests either directly or indirectly that refusing their request could have negative consequences for your career, they are tapping into your fear response system. The manipulation of fear often works through implication rather than direct statement. A supervisor might mention recent layoffs or budget cuts before asking you to take on additional responsibilities without extra compensation. A colleague might share stories about people who were passed over for promotions because they weren't seen as team players before asking you to support them in a meeting or cover for their mistakes. These communications create a background of anxiety that makes it difficult to think clearly about what you're being asked to do and whether it's reasonable or fair. Guilt is another powerful emotion that can be exploited in workplace manipulation. Humans are social creatures who depend on cooperation and mutual support for survival. So we have evolved strong emotional responses to situations where we might be letting others down or failing to meet our social obligations. This guilt response can be triggered even when we haven't actually done anything wrong, simply by framing a situation in a way that makes us feel responsible for others' problems or disappointments. A manipulative colleague might describe how overwhelmed they are with work, how much they're struggling to meet their deadlines, or how their family life is suffering because of their professional obligations. They might share this information in a way that implies that you could help solve their problems if you were willing to take on some of their responsibilities or cover for them in various ways, even though their workload and personal challenges are not your responsibility. The emotional impact of their sharing can create feelings of guilt that make it difficult to refuse their requests for help. The emotion of gratitude, while generally positive and healthy, can also be manipulated through strategic acts of kindness or helpfulness. When someone does something nice for you, your brain releases chemicals that create warmth, positive feelings, and a sense of connection with that person. This gratitude response evolved to encourage reciprocal relationships and ensure that acts of kindness and cooperation are rewarded rather than taken advantage of. However, the same system can be exploited by people who perform calculated acts of kindness with the specific intention of creating a sense of obligation. This manipulation often involves timing and proportion. Someone might help you with a task, bring you coffee, or offer a compliment at just the right moment to maximize the emotional impact. They might frame their help as being particularly costly or inconvenient for them, even when it actually wasn't, to increase your sense of gratitude and obligation. Later, when they ask for something much more significant in return, your gratitude response makes it emotionally difficult to refuse, even when the return favor is disproportionate to the original kindness. Excitement and enthusiasm are emotions that can cloud judgment and make us more susceptible to manipulation. When we're excited about an opportunity or possibility, our brains tend to focus on the potential benefits while downplaying or ignoring potential risks and drawbacks. This optimism bias usually serves us well by encouraging us to pursue opportunities and take reasonable risks, but it can also be exploited by people who know how to artificially generate excitement about proposals that may not actually be in our best interests. This manipulation might involve presenting opportunities in the most favorable possible light while downplaying or omitting important details about costs, risks, or obligations. Someone might describe a project, assignment, or opportunity using language that triggers excitement and ambition, while being vague about the actual requirements or realistic outcomes. They might create artificial time pressure or competition that makes the opportunity seem more valuable and urgent than it actually is. Anger, while often seen as a negative emotion, actually serves important functions in helping us recognize and respond to unfair treatment or violations of our boundaries. However, anger can also be deliberately triggered and then redirected in ways that serve someone else's agenda. When we're angry, our thinking becomes more focused but also more narrow, and we may be more likely to take action without carefully considering all the consequences. Workplace manipulation involving anger often works by first creating frustration or indignation about a situation, then offering a course of action that seems to address the problem but actually serves the manipulator's interests. Someone might point out unfair treatment you've received, inadequate recognition for your work, or problems with company policies, getting you emotionally invested in the idea that something needs to change. Then they might suggest that supporting them or following their advice is the best way to address these problems, even when their proposed solution may not actually help you and might primarily benefit them. Shame is perhaps one of the most painful emotions humans can experience, and it can be a particularly effective tool for manipulation because it strikes at our fundamental sense of self-worth and social belonging. Shame differs from guilt in that guilt involves feeling bad about something you've done, while shame involves feeling bad about who you are as a person. When someone triggers shame, they're attacking your identity and self-concept, which can create a desperate desire to prove that you're actually a good, competent, worthy person. This manipulation might involve subtle suggestions that you're not living up to expectations, that you're being selfish or unreasonable, or that you're not the kind of person others thought you were. The manipulator might compare you unfavorably to others, question your commitment or competence, or suggest that your refusal to comply with their requests reveals character flaws. Because shame is so painful, you might find yourself agreeing to things you don't want to do simply to escape the feeling and restore your sense of self-worth. Hope is a powerful, motivating emotion that can also be exploited in workplace settings. When someone offers us the possibility of achieving something we want, whether it's a promotion, recognition, new opportunities, or improved working conditions. Our brains focus on the potential positive outcomes and may overlook the costs or risks involved in pursuing them. Hope can make us willing to invest time, energy, and resources in pursuit of goals that may be unrealistic or that primarily benefit someone else. Manipulative use of hope often involves making promises or suggestions about future benefits that are vague, conditional, or unlikely to materialize. Someone might hint at possible promotions, raises, or opportunities that could come your way if you demonstrate loyalty, flexibility, or willingness to go above and beyond your normal responsibilities. They might frame current sacrifices or extra work as investments in your future success, even when they have no real power to deliver on these implied promises. Loneliness and the desire for social connection represent fundamental human needs that can be exploited in workplace manipulation. Humans are inherently social creatures, and feelings of isolation or exclusion can be deeply distressing. When someone offers friendship, inclusion, or a sense of belonging, our brains respond with gratitude and attachment that can override our judgment about whether the relationship is actually healthy or beneficial. This manipulation might involve creating artificial in-groups and out-groups, where compliance with certain requests or behaviors is framed as a requirement for membership in the desirable group. Someone might offer special access to information, social events, or informal networks, while implying that this access depends on your willingness to support them or follow their guidance. They might position themselves as your advocate or protector within the organization, creating a sense of dependence that makes it difficult to refuse their requests. Pride, while often considered a positive emotion, can also be manipulated through flattery, recognition, and appeals to your self-image. When someone praises your skills, acknowledges your contributions, or suggests that you're uniquely qualified for certain tasks or responsibilities, your pride response can make you more willing to take on additional burdens or make sacrifices that you might otherwise question. This manipulation often works by linking compliance with requests to your identity as a competent, reliable, or valuable person. Someone might suggest that only someone with your particular skills or qualities could handle a certain task, making refusal feel like an admission that you're not as capable as you thought. They might frame their requests as opportunities to demonstrate your expertise or commitment, even when the actual benefits to you are minimal or non-existent. Empathy, our ability to understand and share the feelings of others, is generally a positive trait that helps us build relationships and contribute to our communities. However, empathy can also be exploited by people who share their problems, struggles, or emotional pain in ways designed to trigger your caring response and motivate you to help them, even when their requests are unreasonable or when helping them would harm your own interests. This manipulation might involve oversharing personal information about financial difficulties, family problems, health issues, or work-related stress. The person might present these problems in ways that suggest you have the power to help solve them, creating a sense of responsibility for their well-being. They might time these emotional appeals to coincide with requests for favors, special treatment, or exceptions to normal rules or expectations. Understanding how emotions can be triggered and manipulated in workplace settings doesn't mean you should try to suppress your feelings or become emotionally disconnected from your colleagues. Emotions provide valuable information about your environment and relationships, and they're essential for building meaningful connections with others. The goal is rather to develop emotional awareness and regulation skills that allow you to recognize when your feelings might be influencing your judgment in ways that don't serve your best interests. One important skill is learning to pause between feeling an emotion and acting on it. When you notice a strong emotional response to a request or situation, take a moment to breathe deeply and ask yourself what might be triggering this feeling. Is the emotion proportionate to the actual situation, or might it be influenced by how the information was presented or framed? Are you feeling pressured to respond immediately, or do you have time to think things through more carefully? Another valuable practice is developing the ability to separate your emotional response to a person from your evaluation of their specific requests or proposals. You might genuinely like and care about a colleague while still recognizing that a particular request they're making is unreasonable or unfair. You can feel empathy for someone's struggles while maintaining appropriate boundaries about what you're willing and able to do to help them. It's also helpful to pay attention to patterns in how certain people interact with you emotionally. Do they tend to share personal problems or emotional appeals primarily when they want something from you? Do they use praise and recognition strategically, offering compliments just before making requests? Do they create emotional urgency around decisions that could reasonably be made with more time and consideration? Learning to recognize and name your emotions can also help you respond to them more consciously. When you can identify that you're feeling guilty, anxious, excited, or grateful, you can ask yourself whether these feelings are based on the actual facts of the situation or whether they might be influenced by how information was presented to you. This awareness doesn't eliminate the emotions, but it can help you make decisions based on a more complete understanding of what's happening. Finally, remember that it's okay to acknowledge your emotions while still maintaining your boundaries and making decisions that serve your best interests. You can say something like, "I can see that you're really struggling with this situation, and I feel for you, but I'm not able to take on additional responsibilities right now." This validates the other person's feelings while protecting your own well-being and maintaining clear boundaries about what you're willing and able to do. As we conclude this gentle exploration of emotional triggers in the workplace, imagine yourself back in that peaceful garden, now with a deeper understanding of the emotional currents that flow through your daily interactions. These emotions are not obstacles to be avoided or weaknesses to be ashamed of, but rather valuable sources of information that can guide you toward healthier relationships and better decisions when you learn to interpret them wisely. Like a skilled gardener who understands both the beauty and the power of water, learning to work with your emotions rather than being overwhelmed by them allows you to maintain both your natural warmth and empathy while also protecting your ability to make choices that truly serve your well-being and values. In this balance, you honor both your emotional nature and your rational wisdom, creating space for authentic relationships while maintaining the boundaries that keep you safe and centered. Settle yourself comfortably as we continue our peaceful journey through the landscape of human psychology. Like travelers following a gentle stream that winds through a quiet valley, the water reflects the soft light of evening as we arrive at one of the most profound and universal aspects of human nature, our deep-seated tendency to look to others for guidance about how to think, feel, and behave. This inclination toward authority and social proof has shaped civilizations, built institutions, and created the complex social structures that allow millions of people to cooperate and coexist. Yet these same tendencies that enable our greatest collective achievements can also make us vulnerable to influence and manipulation in our daily professional lives. From the moment we are born, we are immersed in a world where following the guidance of authority figures is essential for our survival and development. A baby who ignores the warnings and instructions of caregivers will not live long enough to reproduce. A child who refuses to learn from teachers and elders will struggle to acquire the knowledge and skills needed to thrive in their community. Throughout human history, those who could effectively recognize legitimate authority and follow appropriate social cues were more likely to survive, prosper, and pass on their genes to future generations. This evolutionary heritage means that our brains are wired with sophisticated systems for detecting and responding to authority signals and social proof. These systems operate largely below the level of conscious awareness, automatically scanning our environment for cues about who has power, expertise, or social status, and what behaviors are considered normal or appropriate by the groups we belong to. Most of the time, these systems serve us well, helping us navigate complex social situations and learn from the wisdom and experience of others. However, these same systems can also be exploited by those who understand how to trigger our automatic compliance responses. Authority operates on multiple levels in workplace environments, creating a complex hierarchy of influence that extends far beyond the formal organizational chart. There is the obvious authority of job titles and official positions, but there is also the subtler authority of expertise, experience, charisma, and social connections. Someone might have authority in one domain but not in others. Yet our brains often generalize authority across different areas, assuming that someone who is knowledgeable or powerful in one context must be trustworthy and competent in other contexts as well. The psychology of authority begins with our earliest experiences of dependence and care. As infants and children, we literally depend on authority figures for our physical survival, emotional well-being, and cognitive development. Our parents, teachers, and other caregivers possess knowledge, resources, and capabilities that we lack, and learning to trust and follow their guidance is essential for our growth and safety. This early conditioning creates deep neural pathways that associate authority with safety, knowledge, and care, making us naturally inclined to trust and comply with authority figures throughout our lives. In workplace settings, this childhood conditioning can be reactivated by anyone who successfully positions themselves as an authority figure, whether or not they actually possess the knowledge, wisdom, or good intentions that would justify such trust. A colleague might use confident body language, authoritative tone of voice, and impressive-sounding credentials to trigger your automatic respect for authority, even when their actual expertise is limited or their advice is self-serving. A supervisor might leverage their official position to gain compliance with requests that go far beyond their legitimate authority or that primarily serve their personal interests rather than organizational goals. The neuroscience of authority reveals fascinating insights into how our brains process hierarchical relationships. When we encounter someone we perceive as an authority figure, specific neural networks activate that are associated with attention, compliance, and reduced critical thinking. Brain imaging studies show that exposure to authority figures can actually suppress activity in areas of the prefrontal cortex responsible for independent judgment and decision-making. This means that the mere presence of someone we view as an authority can make us less likely to question their statements or critically evaluate their requests. This neurological response evolved because in most situations throughout human history, deferring to legitimate authority was indeed the safest and most effective strategy. The tribal elder who warned against eating certain berries probably had knowledge that could save your life. The experienced hunter who suggested a particular strategy probably had insights that could mean the difference between success and failure. However, in modern workplace environments, this automatic deference to authority can be exploited by people who may not have your best interests at heart. The symbols and signals of authority have evolved over time, but they continue to trigger powerful psychological responses. In contemporary professional settings, these might include impressive job titles, advanced degrees, expensive clothing, confident posture, deep voice, physical height, and association with prestigious organizations or successful projects. Research shows that people respond to these authority signals even when they are completely irrelevant to the situation at hand. Someone wearing a business suit is more likely to be obeyed than someone wearing casual clothing, even when giving directions on a street corner. Someone with an impressive title is more likely to be believed, even when speaking outside their area of expertise. Manipulative individuals often understand these dynamics intuitively and work to cultivate authority signals that will trigger automatic compliance in others. They might invest heavily in their appearance, credentials, and professional image, knowing that these investments will pay dividends in increased influence and reduced resistance to their requests. They might name-drop important contacts, reference prestigious experiences, or display symbols of success and status, all designed to activate your brain's authority detection systems and reduce your inclination to question their motives or proposals. The concept of expert authority represents a particularly sophisticated form of influence because it appears to be based on legitimate knowledge and competence. When someone demonstrates genuine expertise in a particular area, it makes sense to defer to their judgment within that domain. However, this reasonable deference can be exploited in several ways. Someone might exaggerate their level of expertise, claiming knowledge or experience they don't actually possess. They might apply their legitimate expertise in one area to make pronouncements about completely different domains where their knowledge is no better than anyone else's. Or they might use their genuine expertise to build credibility that they then leverage for personal gain rather than to provide helpful guidance. The halo effect plays a crucial role in how expert authority can be manipulated. Once someone establishes themselves as knowledgeable and competent in one area, people tend to assume they are probably knowledgeable and competent in other areas as well. A brilliant engineer might be assumed to have good judgment about management decisions. A successful salesperson might be assumed to understand financial planning. A charismatic leader might be assumed to have expertise in areas completely unrelated to their actual experience. This generalization of authority across different domains can lead to poor decision-making when people follow advice from sources who lack relevant expertise. Social proof operates through a different but equally powerful psychological mechanism. Rather than looking to individual authority figures for guidance, social proof involves looking to the behavior of groups to determine what is normal, appropriate, or effective. This tendency evolved because in many situations, following the crowd is indeed the safest strategy. If everyone else is running away from something, it's probably wise to run too, even if you don't immediately understand the danger. If everyone else is adopting a particular behavior or belief, it's likely that this behavior or belief has some adaptive value that you might not immediately recognize. The power of social proof lies in its ability to bypass individual critical thinking and decision-making. When we see that everyone is doing something, our brains often assume that this collective behavior must be based on information or insights that we lack. Rather than independently evaluating the merits of the behavior, we simply follow along trusting that the collective wisdom of the group is superior to our individual judgment. This can be a reasonable strategy when the group actually does possess better information or when the costs of independent evaluation are high. But it can also lead to poor decisions when the apparent consensus is artificial or when the group's behavior is based on incomplete or misleading information. In workplace settings, social proof can be manipulated through the creation of false consensus or artificial social pressure. Someone might claim that everyone supports a particular proposal, that most people agree with a certain position, or that all the successful people follow a specific strategy, when in reality this consensus is much weaker than suggested or doesn't exist at all. They might arrange for you to hear similar opinions from multiple sources, creating the impression of widespread agreement when these sources are actually coordinated or influenced by the same person. The bandwagon effect represents a specific manifestation of social proof where people adopt beliefs or behaviors simply because they appear to be popular or trending. This effect can be particularly powerful in workplace environments where people are concerned about fitting in, being seen as team players, or staying current with industry trends. Someone might frame their proposals or requests in terms of what everyone is doing now or what all the leading companies have adopted, knowing that this framing will trigger your desire to keep up with current practices and not be left behind. The false consensus effect occurs when people overestimate how much others agree with their own beliefs, opinions, and behaviors. This cognitive bias can be exploited by manipulative individuals who present their personal preferences or self-serving proposals as if they represent widespread agreement or common sense. They might say things like, "I think we can all agree that," or "obviously everyone wants," when in reality their position is controversial or primarily serves their own interests. By framing their proposals as representing obvious consensus, they make it socially awkward to disagree or ask questions. Conformity pressure represents one of the most direct ways that social proof can be used manipulatively. This involves creating situations where disagreeing with a proposal or refusing a request would require you to openly oppose what appears to be group consensus. The pressure to conform can be so strong that people will agree to things they privately disagree with rather than face the social discomfort of being the lone dissenter. This pressure can be created through careful orchestration of meetings, strategic timing of requests, or the creation of artificial deadlines that prevent careful consideration and discussion. The pluralistic ignorance phenomenon occurs when individuals privately disagree with a group norm but assume that everyone else supports it, leading them to publicly conform while privately dissenting. This can create situations where entire groups go along with decisions that most members actually oppose, simply because no one wants to be the first to voice disagreement. Manipulative individuals can exploit this dynamic by creating the impression that their proposals have widespread support, knowing that most people will be reluctant to challenge what appears to be group consensus. The spiral of silence theory explains how social proof can suppress dissenting opinions and create artificial consensus. When people believe their views are in the minority, they become less likely to express them publicly, which makes those views appear even more rare and unpopular. Meanwhile, people who believe their views are popular become more willing to express them, creating a spiral where one perspective becomes increasingly dominant in public discourse, regardless of how much private support it actually has. Understanding this dynamic can help you recognize when apparent consensus might not reflect the true distribution of opinions in your workplace. Authority and social proof often work together in powerful combinations that can be particularly difficult to resist. When an authority figure claims that their position represents widespread agreement or expert consensus, they are leveraging both your tendency to defer to authority and your inclination to follow social proof. This combination can be especially effective because it addresses multiple psychological needs simultaneously: the need for guidance from knowledgeable sources and the need to belong to and conform with social groups. The appeal to false authority represents one common way these forces can be combined manipulatively. Someone might claim that experts, successful people, or respected authorities support a particular position, when in reality this support is exaggerated, misrepresented, or entirely fictional. They might quote out of context, cite irrelevant credentials, or reference authorities who don't actually exist or who never made the statements attributed to them. Because most people don't have the time or resources to verify these claims, they may accept them at face value and allow them to influence their decisions. The manufactured consensus technique involves creating the appearance of widespread agreement through coordinated messaging from multiple sources. This might involve having several people express similar opinions in meetings, circulating documents that present one-sided information, or sharing stories and examples that all support the same conclusion. While each individual message might seem reasonable and independent, the cumulative effect creates an impression of overwhelming consensus that may not reflect the actual distribution of informed opinion. Protecting yourself from manipulation through authority and social proof requires developing awareness of these psychological mechanisms while maintaining your ability to benefit from legitimate authority and genuine social wisdom. The goal is not to become suspicious of all authority figures or to ignore the valuable insights that can come from observing social patterns, but rather to develop more conscious and selective responses to these influences. One important protective strategy is to distinguish between different types of authority and to evaluate whether someone's authority in one area justifies deference in other areas. Someone might be a legitimate expert in their field while having no special knowledge about areas outside their expertise. A person might hold an impressive job title while lacking the character or judgment that would make them trustworthy advisors on personal or ethical matters. Learning to compartmentalize authority can help you benefit from genuine expertise while avoiding inappropriate deference. Another valuable practice is to seek out diverse perspectives and independent sources of information before making important decisions. When someone claims that everyone agrees with a particular position or that all the experts support a certain approach, take time to verify these claims by consulting sources that are independent of the person making the claim. Look for dissenting opinions, alternative approaches, and evidence that contradicts the apparent consensus. It's also helpful to pay attention to the timing and context of authority and social proof appeals. Are you being pressured to make quick decisions based on claims about what others are doing or what experts recommend? Are you being asked to commit to something before you've had time to research the claims being made? Legitimate authorities and genuine social consensus can usually withstand careful scrutiny and don't require immediate, unquestioned compliance. Developing your own expertise and confidence in areas relevant to your work can also provide protection against inappropriate authority influence. When you have your own knowledge and experience to draw upon, you're less likely to defer automatically to others' claims of expertise. You're better able to evaluate whether someone's advice makes sense and whether their credentials are relevant to the specific situation you're facing. Finally, remember that questioning authority and social proof doesn't mean being disrespectful or antisocial. You can acknowledge someone's expertise while still asking clarifying questions. You can recognize social patterns while still thinking independently about what's best for your particular situation. The goal is to engage with authority and social influence consciously and selectively, rather than responding automatically to every authority signal or social pressure you encounter. As we conclude this gentle exploration of authority and social proof in workplace manipulation, imagine yourself standing in a quiet meadow where multiple paths converge, each representing a different source of guidance and influence. Some of these paths are well-worn and reliable, leading to destinations that have served countless travelers well. Others may be newer, less tested, or designed to benefit the pathmakers more than the travelers who follow them. Your task is not to avoid all paths or to distrust all guides, but rather to develop the wisdom to choose your route consciously, evaluating each path based on where it leads and whether it serves your authentic goals and values. In this careful choosing, you honor both the valuable guidance that legitimate authority and genuine social wisdom can provide while protecting your autonomy and your ability to make decisions that truly serve your well-being and growth. Imagine yourself in a quiet library at twilight, where the soft golden light filters through tall windows and illuminates countless volumes of human knowledge and experience. As we turn the pages of understanding together, we arrive at a chapter that reveals the specific tools and techniques that some individuals use to influence others in professional settings. Like a naturalist studying the behavior of various creatures in their habitat, we will observe these methods with curiosity and compassion, understanding them not to judge or condemn, but to recognize and protect ourselves from their effects. The manipulation toolkit is not a single instrument, but rather a collection of psychological techniques that have been refined over centuries of human interaction. These tools work by exploiting the natural tendencies and vulnerabilities in human psychology that we have explored in our previous conversations. Just as a skilled craftsperson might use different tools for different materials and purposes, manipulative individuals often employ various techniques depending on their goals, the situation, and the particular vulnerabilities of the people they are trying to influence. Understanding these techniques is like learning to recognize the calls of different birds in the forest. Once you know what to listen for, you can identify the sounds even when you cannot see their source. This knowledge does not diminish the beauty of the forest or make you suspicious of every sound you hear, but it does give you a deeper appreciation for the complexity of the environment and helps you navigate it with greater awareness and skill. The foot in the door technique represents one of the most commonly used and effective manipulation methods in workplace settings. This approach works by starting with a small, reasonable request that most people would find difficult to refuse, then following up with progressively larger requests that are framed as being consistent with the initial agreement. The psychological principle underlying this technique is our deep human need for consistency and our desire to maintain a coherent self-image as reliable, helpful, and principled people. The initial request in a foot-in-the-door sequence is carefully chosen to be something that aligns with your values or self-image and that requires minimal effort or sacrifice on your part. Someone might ask you to sign a petition supporting a cause you believe in, to attend a brief meeting about an issue you care about, or to provide a small favor that demonstrates your expertise or helpfulness. Once you have agreed to this initial request, you have publicly committed to a position or identity that makes it psychologically difficult to refuse related requests in the future. The follow-up requests are then framed in terms of consistency with your initial commitment. If you agree to sign a petition supporting environmental responsibility, you might later be asked to volunteer time for environmental projects, donate money to environmental causes, or support workplace policies that are presented as environmentally friendly but but that may primarily serve someone else's interests. The manipulator leverages your desire to be consistent with your previous actions and stated values, making it emotionally difficult to refuse without feeling that you are being hypocritical or unreliable. The door-in-the-face technique works through the opposite approach, starting with an extremely large request that is almost certain to be refused, then following up with a more moderate request that seems reasonable by comparison. This method exploits our tendency to feel guilty about refusing requests and our inclination to compromise when someone appears to be making concessions. The psychological principle at work here is reciprocal concession, where we feel obligated to make concessions of our own when others appear to be compromising their initial position. The initial large request in a door-in-the-face sequence is designed to be so unreasonable that most people would refuse it without feeling guilty. Someone might ask you to work overtime every weekend for a month, to take on a major project with an impossible deadline, or to make a significant personal sacrifice for the benefit of the organization. When you refuse this request as expected, they then present their real request, which seems modest and reasonable by comparison, even though it might still be more than you would normally agree to. The effectiveness of this technique lies in the psychological contrast between the initial unreasonable request and the subsequent moderate request. Your brain processes the second request not in absolute terms, but relative to the first request, making it seem like a reasonable compromise rather than an additional burden. You may also feel grateful that the person is being reasonable and making concessions, creating a sense of obligation to reciprocate by agreeing to their modified request. The "that's not all" technique involves presenting an offer or request, then immediately adding additional benefits or reducing the apparent cost before the person has a chance to respond. This method works by creating a sense of momentum and preventing careful consideration of the actual merits of the proposal. The psychological principle underlying this technique is our tendency to feel committed to decisions we appear to be in the process of making, even before we have explicitly agreed to anything. In workplace settings, this technique might involve someone presenting a project or opportunity, then immediately adding information about additional benefits, support, or resources that will be provided. They might describe a task or responsibility, then quickly mention that it won't take as much time as it initially seemed, that help will be available, or that there will be valuable learning opportunities involved. By continuously improving the apparent value of the proposal while maintaining conversational momentum, they make it difficult for you to step back and evaluate whether you actually want to commit to the underlying request. The lowball technique involves getting someone to agree to a request or proposal, then revealing additional costs, requirements, or complications after the initial commitment has been made. This method exploits our psychological investment in decisions we have already made and our reluctance to back out of commitments, even when the terms change significantly after our initial agreement. The technique works because once we have mentally committed to something, we tend to rationalize reasons to follow through, even when the original basis for our decision no longer applies. Someone using this technique might get you to agree to take on a project by presenting it in the most favorable possible terms, emphasizing the benefits and minimizing the costs or complications. After you have agreed and begun to invest time and energy in the project, they then reveal additional requirements, longer deadlines, reduced resources, or other complications that make the commitment much more burdensome than originally presented. By this point, you have already invested effort in the project and may feel committed to seeing it through, even though you would not have agreed to the revised terms if they had been presented initially. The bait-and-switch technique involves advertising or promising one thing, then substituting something different after the person has already invested time, energy, or emotional commitment in the original offer. This method works by taking advantage of our psychological investment in goals and opportunities we have already begun pursuing. Once we have started down a particular path, we tend to continue even when the destination changes, because the alternative feels like wasting the effort we have already invested. In professional settings, this might involve someone describing a job opportunity, project assignment, or career development opportunity in terms that make it seem attractive and beneficial, then changing the terms after you have already committed time and energy to pursuing it. They might promise certain resources, support or outcomes that fail to materialize. Or they might add requirements and responsibilities that were not part of the original description. The technique relies on your reluctance to abandon something you have already invested in, even when it no longer matches what you originally agreed to pursue. The scarcity principle involves creating artificial limitations on time, availability, or opportunity to pressure people into making quick decisions without careful consideration. This technique exploits our evolutionary tendency to value things more highly when they appear to be rare or in high demand. The psychological principle underlying scarcity manipulation is loss aversion, our tendency to feel the pain of losing something more acutely than the pleasure of gaining something equivalent. Artificial scarcity can be created in various ways in workplace settings. Someone might claim that an opportunity is only available for a limited time, that only a few people can participate in a particular project, or that resources or support will only be available if you commit immediately. They might create competition by suggesting that others are also interested in the same opportunity, making you feel that you need to act quickly to avoid missing out. The pressure to make rapid decisions prevents you from carefully evaluating whether the opportunity is actually beneficial or whether the limitations are real. The reciprocity principle involves doing favors or providing benefits with the specific intention of creating a sense of obligation that can later be exploited for much larger returns. This technique works by triggering our deeply ingrained social programming to return favors and maintain balanced relationships. The psychological principle at work is reciprocal altruism, our evolved tendency to help those who have helped us and to feel indebted to those who have provided us with benefits. Manipulative use of reciprocity often involves strategic timing and disproportionate exchanges. Someone might help you with a task, provide information or resources, or offer support during a difficult time, not out of genuine kindness but as an investment in future influence. When they later ask for something in return, your sense of gratitude and obligation makes it difficult to refuse, even when what they are asking for is much more significant than what they originally provided. The technique is particularly effective when the original favor is offered at a moment when you are feeling vulnerable, stressed, or particularly grateful for any assistance. The commitment and consistency principle involves getting people to make small commitments or statements that can then be leveraged to encourage larger commitments that are framed as being consistent with the original position. This technique exploits our psychological need to maintain a coherent self-image and our discomfort with appearing inconsistent or unreliable. Once we have publicly committed to a position or identity, we feel pressure to act in ways that support that commitment, even when circumstances change or when we learn new information that might otherwise change our minds. Someone using this technique might get you to express support for general principles or values, then later frame specific requests in terms of those principles. If you have stated that you believe in teamwork, they might ask you to take on additional responsibilities for the good of the team. If you have expressed commitment to quality or excellence, they might ask you to work extra hours or make personal sacrifices to maintain our high standards. The technique works by making refusal feel like a betrayal of your own stated values and commitments. The liking principle involves creating artificial feelings of similarity, familiarity, and positive connection in order to increase influence and reduce resistance to requests. This technique exploits our natural tendency to be more cooperative and compliant with people we like and feel connected to. The psychological principle underlying this approach is affinity bias, our inclination to trust and help people who seem similar to us or who make us feel good about ourselves. Manipulative use of the liking principle might involve mirroring your interests, opinions, or communication style to create a false sense of similarity and connection. Someone might research your background, hobbies, or preferences and then strategically mention shared interests or experiences. They might use humor, compliments, or expressions of admiration to create positive feelings and emotional warmth. They might position themselves as being on your side in conflicts with others, creating a sense of alliance and shared identity that makes it difficult to refuse their subsequent requests. The authority principle involves leveraging real or perceived expertise, status, or position to reduce questioning and increase compliance. This technique exploits our evolved tendency to defer to authority figures and our assumption that people in positions of power or expertise probably know more than we do about relevant matters. The psychological principle at work is authority bias, our inclination to give greater weight to information and requests that come from sources we perceive as authoritative or expert. Manipulative use of authority might involve exaggerating credentials, expertise, or official position to gain unwarranted influence. Someone might present themselves as having more knowledge, experience, or authority than they actually possess. They might use impressive-sounding titles, credentials, or affiliations to create an aura of expertise that extends beyond their actual areas of competence. They might invoke the authority of others, claiming that expert, successful people, or respected figures support their position, even when the support is exaggerated or entirely fictional. The social proof principle involves creating false impressions of consensus or popularity to pressure people into conforming with apparent group norms. This technique exploits our tendency to look to the behavior of others for guidance about what is normal, appropriate, or effective. The psychological principle underlying this approach is conformity bias, our inclination to align our behavior with what we perceive to be the behavior of our social group. Manipulative use of social proof might involve claiming that everyone is doing something, that most people agree with a particular position, or that all successful people follow a specific strategy, when in reality this consensus is much weaker than suggested or doesn't exist at all. Someone might arrange for you to hear similar opinions from multiple sources, creating the impression of widespread agreement when these sources are actually coordinated. They might use testimonial statistics or examples that are misleading or unrepresentative to create false impressions of popularity or effectiveness. The contrast principle involves presenting information or requests in ways that make them seem more reasonable or attractive by comparison to alternatives that are presented as worse or more extreme. This technique exploits our tendency to evaluate options relatively rather than absolutely, making decisions based on comparisons rather than objective criteria. The psychological principle at work is anchoring bias, our tendency to be heavily influenced by the first information we receive about a topic. Someone using the contrast principle might present their request alongside much more unreasonable alternatives, making their actual request seem moderate and fair by comparison. They might describe worst-case scenarios or extreme alternatives to make their preferred option seem like the obviously sensible choice. They might present information in sequences designed to make certain options appear more attractive, using the order of presentation to influence your perception of relative value or reasonableness. Understanding these manipulation techniques is not meant to make you suspicious of every interaction or to suggest that all influence attempts are manipulative. Many of these same psychological principles can be used ethically and beneficially to encourage positive behaviors, build cooperation, and create mutually beneficial outcomes. The difference lies in the intention behind their use and whether they serve the genuine interests of all parties involved or primarily benefit the person using them. The key to protecting yourself from manipulative use of these techniques is developing awareness of when they are being used and taking time to evaluate requests and proposals based on their actual merits rather than the psychological pressure they create. When you notice that someone is using high-pressure tactics, creating artificial urgency, or appealing to psychological triggers rather than rational arguments, it may be worth stepping back and asking yourself whether their proposal actually serves your interests and aligns with your values. remember that you always have the right to take time to consider important decisions, to ask questions about proposals that affect you, and to seek additional information before committing to anything significant. Legitimate opportunities and trustworthy people will generally respect your need for careful consideration and will be willing to provide clear, honest information about what they are asking of you and what you can expect in return. As we conclude this gentle exploration of manipulation techniques in professional settings, imagine yourself back in that quiet library, now equipped with a deeper understanding of the various tools that some people use to influence others. This knowledge is like a gentle light that illuminates the path ahead, helping you recognize when these techniques are being used while maintaining your natural openness to legitimate influence and genuine cooperation. Like a wise traveler who learns to recognize both helpful guides and those who might lead them astray, you can now navigate your professional relationships with greater awareness and discernment, protecting yourself from manipulation while remaining open to the authentic connections and beneficial opportunities that make work meaningful and rewarding. Picture yourself sitting beside a calm mountain lake at dawn, where the still water perfectly mirrors the surrounding peaks and the gentle morning light reveals subtle differences in the landscape that were hidden in darkness. As we continue our peaceful exploration of human psychology, we turn our attention to the fascinating ways that individual differences shape our susceptibility to influence and manipulation. Like snowflakes or leaves on a tree, no two people respond to psychological pressure in exactly the same way. And understanding these variations can help us recognize our own particular vulnerabilities while developing greater compassion for the struggles that others may face. The human mind is not a uniform landscape, but rather a complex terrain shaped by countless factors including genetics, early experiences, cultural background, personality traits, and life circumstances. These individual differences create unique patterns of strength and vulnerability that influence how we respond to various forms of social pressure and manipulation. What might be completely ineffective with one person could be devastatingly powerful with another, and what represents a minor inconvenience for some might constitute a major threat for others. Gender represents one of the most significant factors influencing susceptibility to different types of manipulation. Though it's important to understand that these differences exist on a spectrum and are influenced by both biological and social factors. Research in psychology and neuroscience has revealed that men and women, on average, tend to process social information differently, respond to different types of emotional appeals, and have different vulnerabilities when it comes to various manipulation techniques. However, these are statistical tendencies rather than absolute rules, and individual variation within each gender is often greater than the average differences between genders. Women on average tend to be more responsive to social and emotional appeals, partly due to differences in brain structure and hormone levels, and partly due to social conditioning that emphasizes relationships, empathy, and cooperation. The female brain typically has more connections between the left and right hemispheres, which may contribute to greater integration of emotional and logical processing. Women also tend to have higher levels of oxytocin, the hormone associated with bonding and trust, which can make them more responsive to appeals that involve relationships, care for others, and social harmony. These tendencies can make women more susceptible to manipulation techniques that exploit empathy, guilt, and concern for others' well-being. A manipulative colleague might share personal problems or struggles, knowing that many women will feel compelled to help even when doing so is not in their best interests. They might frame requests in terms of helping the team, supporting colleagues, or maintaining workplace harmony, appealing to women's often stronger orientation toward cooperation and relationship maintenance. Women may also be more vulnerable to manipulation through social proof and conformity pressure, partly because they are often socialized to be more attuned to social dynamics and group harmony. The fear of being seen as difficult, uncooperative, or unsupportive can make it harder for women to refuse unreasonable requests or to challenge inappropriate behavior. This vulnerability can be exploited by manipulators who create artificial social pressure or who frame their requests in terms of what good team players or supportive colleagues would do. The tendency for women to be more self-critical and to doubt their own judgment can also create vulnerabilities to manipulation. Research shows that women are more likely than men to experience imposter syndrome, to underestimate their own abilities, and to defer to others' expertise even in areas where they are equally or more qualified. Manipulative individuals may exploit these tendencies by positioning themselves as more knowledgeable or experienced, by subtly undermining women's confidence in their own judgment, or by offering guidance and support that creates dependence and obligation. Men on average tend to be more responsive to appeals that involve competition, status achievement, and independence. The male brain typically shows more lateralization, with stronger specialization in different hemispheres, which may contribute to more compartmentalized thinking and decision-making. Men also tend to have higher levels of testosterone, which is associated with competitive behavior, risk-taking, and status-seeking, though these hormonal influences interact in complex ways with social and cultural factors. These tendencies can make men more susceptible to manipulation techniques that exploit competitive instincts, desire for recognition, and concern about status and reputation. A manipulative colleague might frame requests in terms of challenges to be overcome, opportunities to demonstrate competence, or ways to gain recognition and advancement. They might appeal to men's desire to be seen as capable, independent, and successful, making it difficult to refuse requests without feeling that they are admitting weakness or incompetence. Men may also be more vulnerable to manipulation through appeals to logic and expertise, partly because they are often socialized to value rational analysis and technical competence. A manipulator might present their requests using impressive-sounding data, complex reasoning, or technical jargon, knowing that many men will be reluctant to admit that they don't understand or that they need more time to evaluate the proposal. The desire to appear knowledgeable and competent can make it difficult for men to ask clarifying questions or to seek additional information before making decisions. The tendency for men to be more focused on individual achievement and less attuned to social dynamics can also create vulnerabilities. Men may be less likely to notice subtle social manipulation or to recognize when they are being isolated from potential allies and support systems. They may be more susceptible to divide and conquer tactics that pit them against colleagues or that frame workplace issues in terms of individual competition rather than collective problem solving. However, it's crucial to recognize that these gender differences are tendencies rather than deterministic rules, and that individual variation within each gender is enormous. Many women are highly analytical, competitive, and resistant to emotional manipulation, while many men are deeply empathetic, relationship-oriented, and responsive to social pressure, cultural background, personal experiences, education, and individual personality traits all interact with gender in complex ways that make each person's vulnerability profile unique. Personality traits represent another major factor influencing susceptibility to manipulation. The Big Five personality model, which is widely accepted in psychology research, identifies 5 major dimensions of personality that significantly influence how people respond to different types of social influence: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. People high in agreeableness tend to be cooperative, trusting, and concerned with maintaining harmonious relationships. While these are generally positive traits that contribute to effective teamwork and social functioning, they can also create vulnerabilities to manipulation. Highly agreeable individuals may find it difficult to refuse requests, even unreasonable ones, because they want to avoid conflict and maintain positive relationships. They may be more susceptible to guilt-based manipulation and to appeals that frame compliance in terms of helping others or being a good team member. Manipulators often target highly agreeable individuals because they are less likely to question motives, more likely to give others the benefit of the doubt, and more willing to make personal sacrifices for the perceived benefit of others. These individuals may need to work particularly hard to develop assertiveness skills and to learn that saying no to unreasonable requests is not selfish or uncooperative, but rather necessary for maintaining healthy boundaries and preventing exploitation. People high in conscientiousness tend to be organized, responsible, and committed to fulfilling their obligations. While these traits generally contribute to professional success and personal integrity, They can also be exploited by manipulators who understand how to trigger feelings of duty and responsibility. Highly conscientious individuals may be more susceptible to manipulation through appeals to their sense of obligation, their desire to maintain their reputation for reliability, or their commitment to high standards and quality work. A manipulator might frame unreasonable requests in terms of professional duty, organizational loyalty, or commitment to excellence, knowing that conscientious individuals will feel compelled to comply even when doing so is not in their best interests. They might also exploit the tendency of conscientious people to follow through on commitments by getting them to agree to small initial requests that then expand into much larger obligations. People high in neuroticism tend to experience more frequent and intense negative emotions, including anxiety, worry, and self-doubt, while emotional sensitivity can contribute to empathy and awareness of others' needs. High levels of neuroticism can also create vulnerabilities to manipulation. Individuals who are prone to anxiety may be more susceptible to fear-based manipulation, including threats to job security, reputation, or relationships. Manipulators may exploit neurotic tendencies by creating artificial urgency, by suggesting that failure to comply with requests will have serious negative consequences, or by playing on existing fears and insecurities. They might also take advantage of the tendency of highly neurotic individuals to seek reassurance and validation from others, positioning themselves as sources of support and guidance while gradually increasing their influence and control. People high in extroversion tend to be outgoing, sociable, and energized by social interaction. While these traits generally contribute to effective networking and relationship building, they can also create certain vulnerabilities. Extroverts may be more susceptible to manipulation through social proof and peer pressure, partly because they are more attuned to social dynamics and more motivated to maintain their social connections and reputation. Manipulators might exploit extrovert tendencies by creating artificial social pressure, by suggesting that compliance with requests will enhance social standing or relationships, or by threatening social isolation or exclusion. Extroverts may also be more vulnerable to manipulation through charismatic individuals who offer social connection and excitement, even when these relationships are ultimately exploitative. People high in openness to experience tend to be curious, creative, and willing to consider new ideas and approaches. While intellectual curiosity and flexibility are generally positive traits, they can also create vulnerabilities to manipulation by individuals who present themselves as offering novel insights, exclusive information, or innovative approaches. Highly open individuals may be more susceptible to manipulation through appeals to their intellectual interests, their desire for new experiences, or their willingness to consider unconventional ideas. Age represents another significant factor influencing vulnerability to manipulation, though the relationship is complex and depends on the specific type of manipulation being used. Younger workers may be more susceptible to certain types of manipulation due to their relative inexperience with workplace dynamics, their greater need for approval and acceptance from authority figures, and their often more precarious financial and professional situations. Young employees may be more vulnerable to exploitation through unpaid overtime, unreasonable workloads, or inappropriate requests that are framed as learning opportunities or career development. They may be less confident in their ability to recognize inappropriate behavior or to challenge unreasonable demands, particularly when these come from supervisors or more experienced colleagues. The desire to prove themselves and advance their careers can make young workers more willing to accept unfavorable conditions or to agree to requests that more experienced workers would refuse. However, older workers face their own unique vulnerabilities to manipulation. They may be more susceptible to age-related fears about job security, technological obsolescence, or being perceived as inflexible or out of touch. Manipulators might exploit these concerns by suggesting that compliance with certain requests is necessary to demonstrate continued relevance and value to the organization. Older workers may also be more vulnerable to manipulation through appeals to their experience and expertise, particularly when these appeals are used to justify additional responsibilities or expectations that are not fairly compensated. The desire to be seen as mentors and valuable contributors can make older workers more willing to take on extra burdens or to accept treatment that doesn't reflect their actual value to the organization. Cultural background significantly influences both the types of manipulation that individuals are susceptible to and the social norms that govern workplace behavior. People from cultures that emphasize collective harmony, respect for authority, and indirect communication may be more vulnerable to certain types of manipulation, while also having cultural resources that provide protection against other forms of influence. Individuals from cultures that prioritize group harmony over individual assertiveness may find it particularly difficult to refuse requests or to challenge inappropriate behavior, especially when these come from authority figures or when refusal might create conflict or tension. Cultural norms about politeness, respect, and cooperation can be exploited by manipulators who understand how to frame their requests in culturally appropriate terms. Language barriers can also create additional vulnerabilities for non-native speakers, who may miss subtle cues about manipulation or who may be less confident in their ability to articulate objections or ask clarifying questions. The stress of operating in a second language can reduce cognitive resources available for detecting and resisting manipulation. Economic circumstances represent another crucial factor influencing vulnerability to workplace manipulation. Individuals who are experiencing financial stress, who have limited job alternatives, or who are supporting dependents may be more willing to accept unreasonable demands or exploitative conditions because they feel they cannot afford to risk their employment. Manipulators often understand and exploit these economic vulnerabilities, timing their most unreasonable requests for periods when employees are feeling particularly financially pressured. They might also create artificial scarcity around opportunities for advancement or additional income, knowing that economically vulnerable individuals will be more likely to accept unfavorable terms. Personal life circumstances can also influence susceptibility to manipulation. Individuals going through major life transitions, dealing with health problems, experiencing relationship difficulties, or caring for family members may have reduced emotional and cognitive resources available for recognizing and resisting manipulation. They may also be more dependent on their jobs for stability and support, making them more vulnerable to exploitation. Understanding these individual differences in vulnerability is not meant to suggest that some people are weak or that they deserve to be manipulated. Rather, recognizing these patterns can help individuals understand their own particular areas of vulnerability and develop targeted strategies for protection. It can also help create more supportive workplace cultures where people look out for one another and where those who might be more vulnerable receive additional support and protection. For individuals who recognize themselves as potentially more vulnerable to certain types of manipulation, awareness is the first step toward protection. Understanding your own personality traits, cultural background, and life circumstances that might make you more susceptible to influence can help you be more vigilant in situations where these vulnerabilities might be exploited. Developing specific skills and strategies tailored to your particular vulnerabilities can also be helpful. If you tend to be highly agreeable, you might benefit from practicing assertiveness techniques and learning scripts for saying no to unreasonable requests. If you tend to be anxious or neurotic, you might benefit from stress management techniques and from learning to recognize when fear is being used to pressure you into decisions. Building support networks and seeking input from trusted colleagues or mentors can provide additional protection, particularly for individuals who might be more isolated or vulnerable due to their demographic characteristics or personal circumstances. Having people who can provide objective perspectives on workplace situations and who can advocate for your interests can be invaluable in preventing exploitation. Organizations also have a responsibility to create cultures and policies that protect all employees from manipulation and exploitation, with particular attention to those who might be more vulnerable due to their individual characteristics or circumstances. This includes providing clear policies about appropriate workplace behavior, training managers to recognize and prevent manipulation, and creating safe channels for reporting inappropriate conduct. As we conclude this gentle exploration of individual differences in vulnerability to manipulation, imagine yourself back beside that mountain lake, now with a deeper understanding of the unique landscape of your own mind and the particular strengths and vulnerabilities that shape your experience. This self-knowledge is like a detailed map of familiar territory, helping you navigate with greater confidence while remaining aware of areas where extra caution might be needed. Like a wise gardener who understands that different plants have different needs and vulnerabilities, recognizing these individual differences allows you to tend to your own growth and protection with greater skill and compassion, while also extending understanding and support to others who may face different challenges in their professional journeys. In this awareness, you honor both your own unique nature and the beautiful diversity of human experience that enriches our shared workplaces and communities. Imagine yourself walking through a peaceful botanical garden at twilight, where the soft evening light illuminates the intricate patterns of leaves and flowers, revealing the hidden architecture of nature's design. As we continue our gentle journey through the landscape of human psychology, we arrive at perhaps the most fascinating and profound aspect of our exploration, the actual neurological processes that occur within your brain when you encounter manipulation. Like examining the delicate structure of a flower under a microscope, we will explore the intricate neural pathways and chemical reactions that shape your responses to influence and pressure. Understanding these processes not as weaknesses to be ashamed of, but as remarkable examples of how evolution has shaped our minds for survival and cooperation. Your brain is an extraordinary organ, containing approximately 86 billion neurons connected by trillions of synapses, creating a network of staggering complexity that processes information, generates emotions, and guides behavior with remarkable speed and efficiency. When you encounter a situation involving potential manipulation, multiple brain systems activate simultaneously, creating a cascade of neurological responses that influence your thoughts, feelings, and actions often before you are consciously aware that anything significant is happening. The process begins in the sensory systems that constantly monitor your environment for important information. Your eyes detect facial expressions, body language, and visual cues about status and authority. Your ears process tone of voice, word choice, and subtle variations in speech patterns that convey emotional content and social meaning. Even your sense of smell contributes information about stress, confidence, and other emotional states through chemical signals called pheromones that operate below the threshold of conscious awareness. This sensory information travels rapidly to the thalamus, a relay station deep within your brain that acts like a sophisticated switching center, routing different types of information to appropriate processing areas. From the thalamus, the information splits into multiple pathways that process different aspects of the social situation simultaneously. Some information goes directly to the amygdala for rapid threat assessment, while other information travels to the prefrontal cortex for more detailed analysis and conscious consideration. The amygdala, often called the brain's alarm system, plays a crucial role in your response to manipulation attempts. This small almond-shaped structure in the limbic system has evolved to detect potential threats and opportunities with remarkable speed and sensitivity. When the amygdala identifies something significant in your environment, it can trigger emotional and physiological responses within milliseconds, long before your conscious mind has had time to fully process what is happening. During manipulation attempts, the amygdala may detect various threat signals that activate your stress response system. These might include subtle signs of aggression or dominance in someone's posture or tone of voice, indications that your social status or security is being challenged, or cues that suggest you are being deceived or taken advantage of. When the amygdala detects these signals, it initiates a complex cascade of neurological and hormonal responses designed to prepare your body and mind to respond to potential danger. The stress response begins with the release of adrenaline and noradrenaline from the adrenal glands, chemicals that increase heart rate, blood pressure, and alertness while redirecting blood flow to major muscle groups. This physiological activation can make you feel anxious, tense or energized, and it can also affect your cognitive processing in ways that make you more susceptible to certain types of manipulation. When your stress response is activated, your attention narrows and your thinking becomes more focused on immediate concerns, potentially making you less likely to consider long-term consequences or alternative perspectives. Simultaneously, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis begins releasing cortisol, a hormone that helps sustain the stress response over longer periods. Cortisol affects multiple brain systems, including memory formation, decision-making, and emotional regulation. Elevated cortisol levels can impair your ability to access memories that might help you evaluate the current situation, reduce your capacity for complex reasoning, and make you more emotionally reactive and less able to regulate your responses. However, not all neurological responses to social influence involve stress and threat detection. When you encounter someone you perceive as trustworthy, helpful, or attractive, your brain activates reward systems that create positive feelings and increase your motivation to cooperate and connect. The neurotransmitter dopamine plays a key role in these reward responses, creating feelings of pleasure and motivation that encourage you to seek out and maintain relationships with people who trigger these positive reactions. Oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone, is released during positive social interactions and creates feelings of trust, empathy, and connection when someone displays warmth, similarity, or genuine interest in your well-being. Your brain releases oxytocin, which makes you feel more positively toward that person and more inclined to trust their judgment and comply with their requests. This neurochemical response evolved to facilitate cooperation and bonding within social groups, but it can be artificially triggered by manipulative individuals who understand how to present themselves in ways that activate your trust and bonding systems. The mirror neuron system represents another fascinating aspect of how your brain responds to social influence. These specialized neurons fire both when you perform an action and when you observe someone else performing the same action, creating a neurological basis for empathy and social learning. When you watch someone express emotions, your mirror neurons activate as if you were experiencing those emotions yourself, which helps you understand and connect with others but can also make you more susceptible to emotional manipulation. A skilled manipulator might deliberately display emotions or behaviors designed to trigger your mirror neuron responses in ways that serve their agenda. They might express enthusiasm to make you feel excited about their proposals, display stress or anxiety to make you feel concerned about their well-being, or demonstrate confidence to make you feel more certain about their competence and judgment. Because mirror neuron responses happen automatically and unconsciously, you might find yourself experiencing emotions that seem to arise spontaneously but are actually being influenced by the deliberate actions of others. The prefrontal cortex, located at the front of your brain, is responsible for executive functions including planning, decision-making, impulse control, and critical thinking. This region of the brain allows you to analyze situations rationally, consider long-term consequences, and override immediate emotional impulses when necessary. However, the prefrontal cortex is also highly sensitive to stress, fatigue, and emotional arousal, and its functioning can be significantly impaired when you are under pressure or experiencing strong emotions. During manipulation attempts, several factors can compromise prefrontal cortex functioning and make you more likely to make decisions based on emotion rather than careful analysis. Time pressure prevents the prefrontal cortex from engaging in thorough evaluation of options and consequences. Emotional arousal, whether positive or negative, can overwhelm the prefrontal cortex's capacity for rational analysis. Cognitive load from trying to process complex or contradictory information can exhaust the mental resources needed for critical thinking. Manipulative individuals often understand these limitations intuitively and structure their influence attempts in ways that impair prefrontal cortex functioning. They might create artificial time pressure that prevents careful consideration, use emotional appeals that overwhelm rational analysis, or present information in confusing or contradictory ways that exhaust your cognitive resources and make you more likely to rely on mental shortcuts and emotional responses. The anterior cingulate cortex plays a crucial role in conflict monitoring and error detection, alerting you when something doesn't seem right or when you are experiencing internal conflict about a decision. This brain region helps you notice inconsistencies, detect potential deception, and recognize when your automatic responses might not be appropriate for the current situation. However, the anterior cingulate cortex can also be overwhelmed or suppressed when you are under stress or when you are strongly motivated to believe something is true. During manipulation, you might experience what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, a state of mental discomfort that occurs when you hold contradictory beliefs or when your actions conflict with your values. The anterior cingulate cortex detects this conflict and generates feelings of unease or tension that normally motivate you to resolve the inconsistency. However, manipulative individuals might exploit this discomfort by offering explanations or justifications that reduce the cognitive dissonance without actually addressing the underlying problems with their proposals. The insula, a brain region involved in interoception and emotional awareness, helps you monitor your internal physical and emotional states and integrate this information with your conscious decision-making. When you have a gut feeling about someone or something, you are often responding to subtle signals processed by the insula that indicate something important about the situation. This intuitive processing can provide valuable information about potential manipulation, but it can also be influenced by factors that have nothing to do with the actual trustworthiness or appropriateness of what you are being asked to do. The social brain network, which includes regions such as the medial prefrontal cortex, temporal parietal junction, and superior temporal sulcus, specializes in processing social information and understanding the mental states of others. This network helps you interpret facial expressions, understand social hierarchies, predict others' behavior, and navigate complex social situations. However, the same network can be exploited by manipulative individuals who understand how to present social cues that trigger automatic compliance responses. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new neural connections and modify existing ones based on experience, means that your responses to manipulation can change over time depending on your experiences and learning. If you have been successfully manipulated in the past, your brain may have formed neural pathways that make you more susceptible to similar manipulation in the future. Conversely, if you have learned to recognize and resist manipulation, your brain develops stronger neural networks for critical thinking and boundary setting that provide better protection against future influence attempts. The default mode network, active when your mind is at rest and not focused on specific tasks, plays an important role in self-reflection, moral reasoning, and integration of experiences. This network helps you maintain a coherent sense of self and evaluate whether potential actions align with your values and long-term goals. However, manipulation attempts often work by preventing activation of the default mode network through constant stimulation, time pressure, or emotional arousal that keeps your attention focused externally rather than allowing for internal reflection and evaluation. Sleep deprivation, stress, illness, and other factors that affect brain functioning can significantly increase your susceptibility to manipulation by impairing the neural systems responsible for critical thinking, emotional regulation, and decision-making. When you are tired or stressed, your prefrontal cortex functions less effectively. Your emotional responses become more intense and less regulated, and you are more likely to rely on mental shortcuts and automatic responses that can be exploited by manipulative individuals. The neurochemistry of manipulation also involves complex interactions between multiple neurotransmitter systems. Serotonin affects mood impulse control, and social behavior and manipulation attempts might exploit serotonin-related vulnerabilities such as depression, anxiety, or low self-esteem. GABA, the brain's primary inhibitory neurotransmitter, helps regulate anxiety and stress responses, and manipulation might work by overwhelming GABA systems through sustained pressure or threat. Acetylcholine affects attention and learning, and manipulative presentations might exploit acetylcholine systems by controlling what information receives attention and how it is processed. Understanding the neurological basis of manipulation responses can be both empowering and humbling. It is empowering because it helps you recognize that susceptibility to manipulation is not a character flaw or personal weakness, but rather a natural consequence of how human brains have evolved to process social information and make rapid decisions in complex environments. It is humbling because it reveals the sophisticated and largely unconscious processes that influence your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, reminding you that conscious awareness and rational analysis represent only a small portion of your brain's total activity. This neurological understanding also suggests specific strategies for protecting yourself from manipulation. Since many manipulation techniques work by overwhelming or bypassing your prefrontal cortex, creating space for careful reflection and analysis is crucial. This might involve taking time before making important decisions, seeking input from trusted advisors who are not emotionally invested in the outcome, or using structured decision-making processes that help ensure you consider multiple perspectives and long-term consequences. Managing your stress levels and maintaining good self-care practices can also help protect the neural systems responsible for critical thinking and emotional regulation. Regular exercise, adequate sleep, healthy nutrition, and stress reduction techniques all support optimal brain functioning and make you less vulnerable to manipulation attempts that exploit cognitive or emotional vulnerabilities. Developing mindfulness and emotional awareness can help you notice when your brain's automatic response systems are being triggered and create space for more conscious decision-making. When you can recognize the physical sensations and emotional responses that accompany manipulation attempts, you can use this awareness as a signal to slow down and engage your analytical thinking systems more deliberately. Building knowledge and expertise in areas relevant to your work and life can also provide protection by giving your prefrontal cortex more resources for evaluating proposals and detecting inconsistencies or problems. When you have a solid foundation of knowledge and experience to draw upon, you are less likely to be swayed by impressive-sounding but ultimately hollow arguments or by artificial authority that lacks genuine expertise. Creating supportive social networks and seeking diverse perspectives can help compensate for the limitations of individual neural processing. Since manipulation often works by isolating people and controlling the information they receive, maintaining connections with trusted advisors who can provide independent perspectives is crucial for maintaining good judgment and decision-making capacity. Finally, practicing saying no and setting boundaries helps strengthen the neural pathways associated with assertiveness and self-protection. Like any other skill, the ability to resist inappropriate influence becomes stronger with practice. As your brain develops more efficient and automatic responses for recognizing and deflecting manipulation attempts. As we conclude this gentle exploration of the neurological landscape of manipulation, imagine yourself back in that peaceful botanical garden, now with a deeper appreciation for the remarkable complexity and sophistication of the organ that creates your thoughts, emotions, and experiences. Your brain is not a simple computer that processes information objectively, but rather a dynamic adaptive system that has evolved to help you survive and thrive in complex social environments. Understanding how your brain responds to manipulation is like learning to read the subtle signs of weather changes in the natural world. This knowledge doesn't eliminate the storms, but it helps you prepare for them, seek appropriate shelter when necessary, and appreciate the calm, clear days when they come. In this understanding, you find both greater self-compassion for your human vulnerabilities and greater wisdom for navigating the complex social landscape of modern life with awareness, intention, and grace. Picture yourself standing at the edge of a serene forest clearing at sunrise, where the gentle morning light filters through the canopy above and illuminates a path that leads toward greater understanding and inner strength. As we continue our peaceful journey through the landscape of human psychology, we arrive at perhaps the most empowering chapter of our exploration: the development of awareness and inner resilience that can protect you from manipulation while preserving your natural warmth, openness, and capacity for genuine connection with others. Building awareness is like cultivating a garden of consciousness, where you learn to recognize the subtle signs and patterns that indicate when someone might be trying to influence you inappropriately. This awareness does not require you to become suspicious or cynical. but rather to develop a gentle vigilance that allows you to notice when situations don't feel quite right, when requests seem disproportionate to relationships, or when pressure is being applied in ways that bypass your rational decision-making processes. The foundation of this awareness begins with understanding your own internal landscape, learning to recognize the physical sensations, emotional responses, and thought patterns that arise when you encounter different types of social influence. Your body often knows before your conscious mind that something is amiss, sending subtle signals through changes in breathing, muscle tension, heart rate, or gut feelings that something doesn't feel right about a particular interaction or request. Developing the somatic awareness requires patience and practice. Like learning to distinguish between different bird songs in the forest. Start by paying attention to how your body feels during various workplace interactions. Notice what happens to your breathing when someone makes a request of you. Observe whether your shoulders tense up when certain colleagues approach you with proposals. Pay attention to whether your stomach feels tight or relaxed when you're listening to explanations or justifications for why you should do something. These physical responses often provide more accurate information about the appropriateness of a situation than your conscious thoughts, which can be influenced by the very manipulation techniques we have been exploring. Your nervous system has evolved over millions of years to detect subtle threats and opportunities, and it continues to process information about safety and danger even when your rational mind is focused on being polite. Helpful or professional emotional awareness represents another crucial component of building protection against manipulation. Learning to recognize and name your emotions as they arise gives you valuable information about what is happening in your interactions with others. When you notice that you suddenly feel guilty, anxious, excited, or pressured, you can use these emotions as data points rather than simply experiencing them as forces that compel you to act in particular ways. Guilt, for example, often arises when someone is trying to make you feel responsible for their problems or when they are suggesting that refusing their request would make you a bad person. Anxiety might indicate that you are being pressured to make decisions too quickly or that someone is creating artificial urgency around choices that could reasonably be made with more time and consideration. Excitement might suggest that someone is presenting opportunities in overly favorable terms while downplaying potential costs or risks. The key is to notice these emotions without immediately acting on them, creating a small space between feeling and action where you can consider whether your emotional response is proportionate to the actual situation or whether it might be influenced by how information is being presented to you. This doesn't mean ignoring your emotions or trying to suppress them, but rather treating them as valuable sources of information that deserve consideration alongside other factors in your decision-making process. Cognitive awareness involves developing your ability to recognize the thought patterns and mental shortcuts that can be exploited by manipulative individuals. This includes noticing when you are being encouraged to make quick decisions, when information is being presented in ways that prevent careful analysis, or when your attention is being directed away from important considerations that might influence your choices. One helpful practice is to develop the habit of asking yourself specific questions when you encounter requests or proposals that might involve manipulation. What exactly is being asked of me? What are the potential costs and benefits? Both short-term and long-term, what information might I be missing that would help me make a better decision? Who benefits most from this arrangement? What would happen if I said no or asked for more time to consider? These questions help activate your analytical thinking systems and can reveal aspects of situations that might not be immediately obvious when you are focused on being responsive and accommodating. They also help you distinguish between legitimate requests that deserve consideration and manipulative attempts that are designed to bypass your careful judgment. Developing pattern recognition skills can help you identify recurring themes in how certain individuals interact with you or in how manipulation attempts are structured. You might notice that particular colleagues tend to approach you with requests when you are stressed. tired, or dealing with other pressures. You might observe that certain types of proposals are always presented with artificial time pressure, or that specific individuals consistently frame their requests in terms of emergencies or special circumstances. Recognizing these patterns doesn't necessarily mean that every instance is manipulative, but it does suggest that you might benefit from being more cautious and deliberate in your responses. When you notice familiar patterns emerging, you can use this awareness as a signal to slow down. Ask more questions and seek additional perspectives before making commitments. Building inner strength involves developing the psychological resources and skills that make you less vulnerable to manipulation while maintaining your ability to form genuine connections and respond appropriately to legitimate requests for help and cooperation. This inner strength is not about becoming hard or closed off, but rather about developing a solid sense of your own worth, values, and boundaries that provide stability and guidance in complex social situations. Self-worth represents the foundation of inner strength and resistance to manipulation. When you have a solid sense of your own value and competence, you are less likely to be swayed by attempts to make you feel inadequate, guilty, or dependent on others' approval. Building healthy self-worth involves recognizing your strengths and accomplishments, accepting your limitations and mistakes as part of being human, and developing an internal sense of validation that doesn't depend entirely on external recognition or approval. This doesn't mean becoming arrogant or dismissive of feedback from others, but rather developing enough confidence in your own judgment and worth that you can evaluate others' opinions and requests without automatically assuming that they know better than you do or that their needs are more important than your own. When you have solid self-worth, you can be generous and helpful without feeling compelled to sacrifice your own well-being or compromise your values to gain others' approval. Clarifying your values provides another crucial foundation for inner strength and protection against manipulation. When you have a clear sense of what is most important to you, what principles guide your decisions, and what kind of person you want to be, you have internal criteria for evaluating requests and proposals that come from others. This clarity helps you recognize when you are being asked to act in ways that conflict with your values or that would require you to compromise important aspects of your integrity. Values clarification is an ongoing process that involves reflecting on what matters most to you in different areas of your life, including your relationships, your work, your personal growth, and your contribution to your community. These values serve as a compass that can guide you through complex situations where the right course of action might not be immediately obvious. When someone asks you to do something that conflicts with your core values, this conflict can serve as an early warning signal that the request might not be appropriate or that you need to consider it more carefully. Developing assertiveness skills provides practical tools for expressing your boundaries, declining inappropriate requests, and advocating for your own needs and interests. Assertiveness is often misunderstood as being aggressive or selfish, but it actually represents a balanced approach to communication that respects both your own rights and the rights of others. Assertive communication allows you to be clear and direct about your needs and limitations while remaining respectful and considerate of others. Learning to say no effectively is a crucial component of assertiveness and protection against manipulation. Many people struggle with saying no because they fear being seen as unhelpful, uncooperative, or selfish. However, the ability to decline inappropriate requests is essential for maintaining healthy boundaries and preventing exploitation. Effective ways to say no include being direct and clear about your decision, offering brief explanations when appropriate without over-justifying, suggesting alternatives when possible, and remaining calm and respectful even when others respond negatively to your refusal. Practicing assertiveness in low-stakes situations can help you develop confidence and skill that will serve you well when facing more significant manipulation attempts. This might involve speaking up in meetings when you disagree with proposals, asking for clarification when instructions are unclear, or expressing your preferences about scheduling and work arrangements. The more comfortable you become with advocating for yourself in everyday situations, the easier it will be to maintain your boundaries when facing facing more serious pressure. Building emotional regulation skills helps you maintain clear thinking and good judgment even when others are trying to trigger strong emotional responses that might cloud your decision-making. Emotional regulation doesn't mean suppressing or ignoring your emotions, but rather developing the ability to experience emotions fully while still maintaining your capacity for rational analysis and conscious choice. Techniques for emotional regulation include deep breathing exercises that activate your parasympathetic nervous system and promote calm. Clear thinking mindfulness practices that help you observe your emotions without being overwhelmed by them. Cognitive reframing techniques that help you interpret situations in ways that support your well-being and good judgment. Physical exercise and movement that help process stress hormones and maintain emotional balance. When you can remain emotionally centered during challenging interactions, you are better able to recognize manipulation attempts, think clearly about your options, and respond in ways that serve your best interests. This emotional stability also makes you a less attractive target for manipulation, since manipulative individuals often prefer to work with people who are emotionally reactive and easily destabilized. Developing critical thinking skills provides intellectual tools for evaluating information, identifying logical fallacies, and recognizing when arguments or proposals are based on faulty reasoning or incomplete information. Critical thinking involves learning to ask good questions, seek evidence for claims, consider alternative explanations, and recognize the difference between correlation and causation. In workplace contexts, critical thinking might involve questioning assumptions about what constitutes normal or acceptable behavior, evaluating whether proposed solutions actually address the problems they claim to solve, and considering whether the benefits of particular arrangements are distributed fairly among all parties involved. When someone presents you with information or proposals, critical thinking helps you evaluate their credibility, completeness, and relevance to your situation. Building social support networks provides external resources that can help you maintain perspective and good judgment when facing manipulation attempts. Trusted friends, family members, mentors, or colleagues can offer objective viewpoints on situations where you might be too emotionally involved to see clearly. They can help you recognize patterns in your relationships that you might not notice on your own. And they can provide encouragement and validation when you need to make difficult decisions about setting boundaries or declining inappropriate requests. Effective social support involves cultivating relationships with people who genuinely care about your well-being, who are willing to tell you difficult truths when necessary, and who have the wisdom and experience to offer valuable guidance. These relationships require investment and reciprocity, as you also need to be willing to provide support and honest feedback to others when they need it. Developing professional competence and expertise in your field provides another form of protection against manipulation by giving you confidence in your own knowledge and judgment. When you have solid skills and understanding in your area of work, you are less likely to be intimidated by others' claims of superior knowledge or to defer inappropriately to authority figures who may not actually have relevant expertise. Continuing education, skill development, and staying current with developments in your field all contribute to this professional confidence. When you know that you are competent and knowledgeable, you can evaluate others' suggestions and demands based on their merit rather than simply accepting them because they come from someone with an impressive title or confident manner. Creating personal policies and decision-making frameworks can help you respond consistently to manipulation attempts without having to reinvent your approach each time. These might include policies about not making important decisions under time pressure, always seeking a second opinion before committing to significant new responsibilities, or requiring written documentation for any agreements that involve changes to your job duties or compensation. Having predetermined frameworks for decision-making helps you avoid being caught off guard by manipulation attempts and provides structure for evaluating requests and proposals objectively. When someone asks you to make an exception to your normal policies, this request itself can serve as a warning signal that the situation might require extra caution and consideration. Practicing self-care and stress management helps maintain the psychological and physical resources needed for good judgment and effective boundary setting. When you are tired, stressed, or overwhelmed, You are more vulnerable to manipulation because your cognitive and emotional resources are depleted. Regular exercise, adequate sleep, healthy nutrition, relaxation practices, and activities that bring you joy and fulfillment all contribute to your overall resilience and ability to handle challenging situations. Self-care also involves recognizing your own limits and being willing to prioritize your well-being when necessary. This might mean taking breaks when you need them, seeking help when you are overwhelmed, or stepping back from situations that are consistently draining or harmful to your mental health. Finally, developing a growth mindset about your ability to recognize and resist manipulation can help you continue improving your skills over time. Rather than seeing yourself as either vulnerable or invulnerable to manipulation, recognize that awareness and resistance skills can be developed and strengthened through practice and experience. Each situation where you successfully recognize and respond to manipulation attempts builds your confidence and competence for handling future challenges. This growth mindset also helps you learn from situations where you might have been manipulated or where you didn't respond as effectively as you would have liked. Rather than feeling ashamed or defeated by these experiences, you can view them as learning opportunities that provide valuable information about your vulnerabilities and areas for continued growth. As we conclude this gentle exploration of building awareness and inner strength, imagine yourself back in that peaceful forest clearing, now equipped with a deeper understanding of your own psychological landscape and the tools needed to navigate it with wisdom and grace. This awareness and strength are like a gentle light that illuminates your path, helping you distinguish between genuine opportunities for connection and growth and situations that might not serve your best interests. Like a tree that grows strong roots to weather storms while still reaching toward the light and offering shelter to others, you can develop the inner resources needed to protect yourself from manipulation while maintaining your natural capacity for generosity, cooperation, and authentic relationship. In this balance, you honor both your own well-being and your desire to contribute positively to the communities and workplaces where you spend your time and energy. Picture yourself standing in a beautiful garden at golden hour, where the warm light creates a peaceful sanctuary filled with carefully tended boundaries that allow each plant to flourish while contributing to the harmony of the whole. As we approach the culmination of our gentle journey through the psychology of workplace influence, we arrive at one of the most practical and empowering aspects of our exploration: learning to create and maintain healthy boundaries that protect your well-being while preserving your ability to build meaningful professional relationships and contribute positively to your work environment. Boundaries are not walls that separate you from others, but rather like the banks of a river that give shape and direction to the flow of water, allowing it to move with purpose and power while preventing it from becoming scattered or stagnant. In workplace settings, healthy boundaries define the limits of what you are willing to accept, what you are prepared to give, and how you expect to be treated by others. These boundaries serve as both protection and guidance, helping you navigate complex professional relationships with clarity and confidence. Understanding the nature of healthy boundaries begins with recognizing that they exist to serve your authentic well-being and values, not to punish or exclude others. Boundaries are about taking responsibility for your own experience and choices while allowing others to take responsibility for theirs. They create space for genuine relationships based on mutual respect and consideration, rather than relationships based on manipulation, exploitation, or unhealthy dependence. Emotional boundaries protect your psychological well-being by defining how much emotional responsibility you are willing to take for others' feelings, problems, and reactions in workplace settings. Emotional boundaries might involve recognizing that while you can be empathetic and supportive toward colleagues who are struggling, you are not responsible for solving their personal problems, managing their emotions, or sacrificing your own well-being to make them feel better. Creating healthy emotional boundaries requires learning to distinguish between empathy and emotional absorption. Empathy allows you to understand and care about others' experiences without taking on their emotions as if they were your own. Emotional absorption, on the other hand, involves becoming so affected by others' feelings that you lose your own emotional center and begin to feel responsible for fixing or managing their emotional states. When a colleague shares personal problems or work-related stress with you, healthy emotional boundaries allow you to listen with compassion and offer appropriate support without feeling that you must solve their problems or that their emotional state is your responsibility. You can acknowledge their difficulties and express genuine care while maintaining your own emotional stability and perspective. Time boundaries define how you allocate your most precious resource, ensuring that your time is used in ways that align with your priorities, values, and responsibilities in professional settings. Time boundaries might involve being clear about your working hours, protecting time for important projects and personal responsibilities, and declining requests that would require you to consistently sacrifice your own priorities for others' convenience. Establishing time boundaries often requires learning to distinguish between genuine emergencies that warrant flexibility and artificial urgency that is created to pressure you into immediate compliance. True emergencies are relatively rare and involve situations where immediate action is necessary to prevent significant harm or loss. Artificial urgency, on the other hand, involves creating false deadlines or exaggerating the importance of immediate action to prevent you from taking time to consider your options carefully. When someone approaches you with a request that they claim is urgent, healthy time boundaries allow you to ask clarifying questions about why immediate action is necessary, what would happen if the request were delayed, and whether there are alternative solutions that might be less disruptive to your existing commitments. This doesn't mean being uncooperative or inflexible, but rather ensuring that your time is allocated thoughtfully rather than reactively. Professional boundaries define the scope of your job responsibilities and the limits of what you are willing to do in your professional capacity. These boundaries help prevent role confusion, scope creep, and exploitation while ensuring that you can fulfill your actual job responsibilities effectively. Professional boundaries might involve being clear about what tasks and responsibilities are part of your job description, what additional work you are willing to take on and under what circumstances, and how you expect to be compensated for work that goes beyond your normal duties. Creating healthy professional boundaries requires understanding the difference between being helpful and being exploited. Being helpful involves contributing to team goals, supporting colleagues when you have the capacity to do so, and occasionally going above and beyond when circumstances warrant it. Being exploited involves consistently taking on responsibilities that should belong to others, working significantly more than you are compensated for, or allowing your job duties to expand indefinitely without corresponding increases in recognition or compensation. When someone asks you to take on additional responsibilities or tasks that fall outside your normal job duties, healthy professional boundaries allow you to consider whether the request is reasonable, whether you have the capacity to fulfill it without compromising your other responsibilities, and whether taking on the additional work aligns with your professional goals and values. Physical boundaries in workplace settings involve maintaining appropriate physical space and contact with colleagues, ensuring that your physical environment supports your well-being and productivity, and protecting your physical health and safety. These boundaries might involve being clear about your comfort level with physical contact, maintaining appropriate personal space during conversations, and ensuring that your workspace is organized and equipped in ways that support your effectiveness. Physical boundaries also extend to protecting your physical health by maintaining reasonable limits on working hours, taking appropriate breaks, and declining requests that would require you to work in ways that compromise your health and safety. This might involve refusing to work excessive overtime on a regular basis, insisting on proper equipment and working conditions, or declining to travel or work in situations that pose unnecessary risks to your well-being. Communication boundaries define how you prefer to communicate with colleagues and what types of communication you are willing to engage in. These boundaries might involve establishing preferred methods and times for communication, being clear about what topics you are comfortable discussing in professional settings, and maintaining appropriate levels of personal disclosure in workplace relationships. Healthy communication boundaries allow you to be friendly and personable with colleagues while maintaining appropriate professional distance. You can share aspects of your personal life that help build rapport and connection without feeling obligated to discuss private matters that you prefer to keep separate from your work relationships. You can engage in workplace conversations and social interactions while maintaining the right to decline participation in gossip, inappropriate discussions, or conversations that make you uncomfortable. Financial boundaries protect your economic well-being by ensuring that you are fairly compensated for your work and that you don't allow financial pressure or manipulation to compromise your professional judgment. These boundaries might involve being clear about your salary expectations, declining to work for free or below market rates, and avoiding financial entanglements with colleagues that could create conflicts of interest or inappropriate pressure. Creating healthy financial boundaries requires understanding your own worth and being willing to advocate for fair compensation. This doesn't mean being greedy or unreasonable, but rather ensuring that you are paid appropriately for the value you provide and that financial considerations don't force you into compromising your professional integrity or personal well-being. The process of implementing boundaries often involves a gradual approach that allows you to build confidence and skill while minimizing conflict and disruption in your professional relationships. Start by identifying areas where you most need boundaries and begin implementing them in low-stakes situations where the consequences of others' reactions are minimal. As you become more comfortable with boundary setting, you can gradually apply these skills to more challenging situations. When implementing new boundaries, it's important to communicate them clearly and consistently, rather than hoping that others will intuitively understand your limits. Be direct and specific about what you are and are not willing to do. This communication should be respectful and professional, but also firm and unambiguous. Avoid over-explaining or apologizing excessively for having boundaries, as this can undermine your message and invite negotiation or pressure. Expect that some people may respond negatively to your boundaries, especially if they have benefited from your previous lack of boundaries. This resistance doesn't mean that your boundaries are inappropriate or that you should abandon them. Instead, view these reactions as information about the nature of your relationships and the extent to which others may have been taking advantage of your flexibility or generosity. Maintaining boundaries requires ongoing attention and occasional reinforcement. Some people may test your boundaries to see if you are serious about maintaining them, while others may gradually push against them over time. Consistency is crucial for maintaining the effectiveness of your boundaries and for building others' respect for your limits. When someone violates your boundaries, address the violation promptly and directly rather than hoping it won't happen again or trying to manage the situation indirectly. Clear, immediate feedback helps prevent boundary violations from becoming patterns and demonstrates that you are serious about maintaining your limits. It's also important to be flexible and thoughtful about your boundaries, recognizing that they may need to be adjusted based on changing circumstances, new information, or evolving relationships. Healthy boundaries are not rigid rules that never change, but rather guidelines that can be modified when appropriate while still serving their essential function of protecting your well-being and values. Creating supportive workplace cultures involves not only maintaining your own boundaries but also respecting others' boundaries and advocating for organizational policies and practices that support healthy professional relationships. When you model appropriate boundary setting and respect for others' limits, you contribute to a workplace culture where manipulation and exploitation are less likely to occur and where everyone can contribute their best work while maintaining their well-being. This might involve speaking up when you witness boundary violations, supporting colleagues who are learning to set their own boundaries, and advocating for clear policies about working hours, job responsibilities, and appropriate professional conduct. Creating change in workplace culture often requires collective effort, and your individual commitment to healthy boundaries can inspire and support others in developing their own protective practices. Transforming your work environment also involves developing the skills and confidence to address manipulation and inappropriate behavior when you encounter it. This doesn't necessarily mean confronting every instance of manipulation directly, but rather developing a range of responses that allow you to protect yourself while maintaining professional relationships when possible. Sometimes the most effective response to manipulation is simply to decline the inappropriate request without engaging in lengthy discussions about why the request is problematic. Other times it may be helpful to ask clarifying questions that expose the manipulative nature of the request or to suggest alternative solutions that meet legitimate needs without compromising your boundaries. In more serious cases, it may be necessary to document inappropriate behavior and report it to supervisors or human resources departments. Having clear records of manipulative behavior can be crucial for protecting yourself and for helping organizations address problematic patterns that may be affecting multiple employees. As we conclude this exploration of creating healthy boundaries and transforming work environments, imagine yourself back in that beautiful garden where each plant has the space and support it needs to flourish while contributing to the beauty and productivity of the whole. Your boundaries are like the careful tending that allows this garden to thrive, creating conditions where authentic relationships can grow and where everyone can contribute their unique gifts without fear of exploitation or manipulation. The journey we have taken together through the landscape of workplace psychology has revealed both the vulnerabilities that make us human and the strengths that allow us to protect ourselves while remaining open to genuine connection and collaboration. Understanding why you might be easily manipulated at work is not about judging yourself or others, but rather about developing the awareness and skills needed to navigate professional relationships with wisdom, integrity, and grace as you continue forward in your professional journey. Carry with you the knowledge that susceptibility to manipulation is not a personal failing but a natural consequence of the social and psychological mechanisms that also enable cooperation. Empathy and trust, the same qualities that might make you vulnerable to exploitation, such as your desire to help others, your respect for authority, and your inclination to trust, are also among your greatest strengths as a colleague and contributor to your workplace community. The goal is not to eliminate these positive qualities, but rather to express them consciously and selectively, ensuring that your generosity and cooperation serve authentic relationships and worthy causes rather than being exploited by those who would take advantage of your good nature. In developing this discernment, you honor both your own well-being and your desire to contribute positively to the world around you. Remember that building awareness and inner strength is an ongoing process that unfolds gradually over time. Each situation where you successfully recognize and respond to manipulation attempts builds your confidence and competence for handling future challenges. Each boundary you establish and maintain strengthens your capacity for healthy relationships. Each moment of conscious choice rather than automatic reaction deepens your understanding of your own values and priorities. The skills and insights you have gained through our exploration together will serve you not only in protecting yourself from manipulation, but also in building more authentic and satisfying professional relationships. When you can interact with colleagues from a place of clarity and confidence rather than fear and reactivity, you create space for genuine collaboration, mutual respect, and shared success. As you apply these insights in your daily work life, be patient and compassionate with yourself as you learn and grow. Change takes time, and developing new patterns of thinking and responding requires practice and persistence. Celebrate small victories and learn from situations that don't go as planned, recognizing that every experience contributes to your growing wisdom and resilience. Trust in your own capacity for growth and healing, knowing that you have within you all the resources needed to create professional relationships that honor your worth and support your well-being. Like a tree that grows strong roots while reaching toward the light, you can develop the stability and strength needed to weather challenges while maintaining your natural capacity for growth, connection, and contribution. In this balance between protection and openness, between wisdom and trust, between individual well-being and collective good, you find the path toward a more conscious and fulfilling professional life. May your journey be filled with authentic connections, meaningful work, and the deep satisfaction that comes from living and working in alignment with your highest values and aspirations. The gentle light of awareness that has illuminated our path together will continue to guide you as you navigate the complex landscape of human relationships with greater skill and confidence. In this light, you find both the clarity to see situations as they truly are and the compassion to respond with wisdom and grace, creating ripples of positive change that extend far beyond your immediate experience to touch the lives of all those who have the privilege of working alongside you.